Is there a more rude wake-up call than realizing you have been saddled with a responsibility that you didn't sign up for? You didn't volunteer, and even worse, you didn't see it coming. You just find out in one moment that you have been labeled as the one to take care of things. And even though all you want to do is walk away saying, I didn't ask for this, you can't, because other people are depending on you. Maybe you suggested an idea offhandedly in a company meeting and suddenly you're heading up a critical task force. Or you yell one too many strategy tips at your kid's soccer game and now all the other parents want you to coach. Or, on a darker note, when tragedy hits, maybe because you're the only one who visibly seems put together, everyone is looking to you to lead them through it, even though you're just as broken as everyone else inside. How do you move forward when all you want to do is curl up in a ball and pretend the world doesn't exist? How do you act brave when you're desperately looking around for the adult in the room, only to see expectant eyes from everyone else looking back at you because they consider you to be that adult? How can you shoulder the unbearable weight of everyone counting on you? That is what we're going to find out as we examine Andy Weir's hard sci-fi novel, Project Hail Mary. And even though these hefty themes are very much present in the story, it's also a very optimistic and hopeful tale. So don't let this intro make you think it's as depressing as some of the recent books we've been covering. But that's enough of that. The only housekeeping item today is to point out, which you've already probably noticed, I'm a little bit stuffy. I'm 3 days late recording this because I've been sick and I just can't put it off any longer because I'm too excited about this story. So we're gonna deal with it and let's just roll that intro and get started because this book is such a good time. What's 2 plus 2? The voice feels distant and yet the question annoys me for some reason. I just want to go back to sleep. What's 2 plus 2? It's a woman's voice, pleasant, but I don't want to be having to answer math questions right now. There's just enough of a hint of a robotic voice for me to assume this is a computer, and she won't leave me alone. Is the only sound I make. Incorrect is the reply. What's 2 plus 2? This goes back and forth several times. I'm slowly coming to more and more with each obnoxious repetition of what's 2 plus 2? My eyes have been closed this entire time. Why haven't I opened my eyes? Am I blind? After what felt like a Herculean effort to pry my eyelids apart, I see a big blurry nothing. But now that my eyes were open, the computer said, eye motion detected, which somehow makes the computer feel more insistent that I should be able to answer its torturous question. What's 2 plus 2? I can feel my jaw muscles working, but my brain doesn't seem capable of connecting my thoughts to my body. Is all I can get out. Incorrect. You think I don't know that? My eyes are blinded by these bright LED lights. The pure whiteness of them is astounding. My eyes finally come into focus because of movement. There's a threat. I'm staring at robotic arms with pincer-like hands that hover above me like Doc Ock from Spider-Man. No, I think were my exact words. Incorrect. What's 2 plus 2? The arms start to lower towards me, and I exert all my intelligence and strength to say, 4. Correct, replied the computer. It seemed to leave me alone for a second, and that's when I took stock of my body. My throat feels raw and aching. It's only now that I realize I have a breathing mask on, and I lift my head enough to look at my body. I'm naked? I wasn't expecting that, but I've got a large number of tubes connected to me, my arms, my legs, my gentleman's equipment, and one's running to my backside. I can take a wild guess where those go. Ooh, where am I? I gasp. The computer ignores me. What's the cube root of 8? Where am I ask again, this time somewhat coherently. Incorrect. What's the cube root of 8? I take a breath. 2 times e to the 2i pi. Incorrect. What's the cube root of 8? I know I'm actually right, but I wanted to test how smart the computer really was, and it turns out it's not that smart. 2, I say this time, and the computer stops asking questions, and I fall back asleep, overwhelmed from all this exertion. When I wake up the next time, I start trying to move. I wiggle my fingers, but the computer tells me to stay still. The robot arms start bustling around me. They're removing the cables, but when they're done, there are still 3 that remain. And 2 of those are the very ones I most wanted removed, if you catch my drift. The other was an IV in my arm. I try to raise that arm, but it falls down heavily, like suspiciously heavy. But I notice my arms do look muscular, which is a surprise. Shouldn't I be emaciated from such prolonged unconsciousness that I can only assume I've been in? I can't tell how long I've been out, but based on the system that seems to be taking care of me, I would guess it has not been a short amount of time. I ask the computer to take out the tubes, but it ignores me. I continue testing my limbs, rolling my ankles, bending my elbows. I'm slowly getting control back. And eventually I place my hands on the bed and raise myself up. As I do, I can feel the butt tube sticking into me, and it's not a great feeling. This is a weird-looking hospital room, I think. First of all, the room is round. I glance around and I see that I'm not alone. There are 2 other beds with patients, but neither of them seem to be awake right now. But wait, where's the door? I scan the entire cornerless room and there's no door, just a ladder that goes up to a hatch in the ceiling? Are we in some weird quarantine? I twist until my legs dangle off the edge of the bed and the arms start to hover around me. Full body motion detected, the computer said. What's your name? Incorrect. What's your name? Nothing comes to me. Incorrect. What's your name? When I fail to remember my own name for a 3rd time, I'm injected with something that makes me sleepy. The arms help guide me back to a horizontal position. I'll spare you the more gruesome details of what happened next, but when I woke up again, I was determined to break free of this mechanical babysitter. So when I failed the name game again, instead of being injected, I used all my strength to roll off the bed. It was not my best idea. Remember where those tubes were? Yeah, they are not pleasant to remove when done carefully. Just imagine what they felt like being abruptly torn from those places. Let's just say I suspect that I now know what people with kidney stones go through. I scream uncontrollably as I writhe on the ground. Physical distress, my faceless tormentor says. The arms pursue me, but I roll under one of the other beds. The arms stop short. I'm not sure if they're just not long enough or if they're just patient enough for me to move. I hastily wipe tears from my face. What's your name? The voice asks again. I desperately need one of these others to wake up so they can tell me what's going on. I look back at the ground where my catheter is dripping a streak of blood. It's just a thin red line of... I sipped my coffee while I waved at the waitress for my check. She was busy fielding questions from some other customer who looked like they might be the type to ask if this diner served gluten-free grass clippings. But hey, that's San Francisco for you. It was only 7 a.m., but I like to be to work before 7:30 so I had time to prep. While I wait for my check, I look at my email on my phone. There's an email from a list I thought I'd unsubbed to a long time ago called Astronomy Curiosities. The email was from a PhD named Irina Petrova. Subject was the thin red line. Dr. Petrova was from the Pulkova Observatory in St. Petersburg. She'd been doing infrared research on nebula when she stumbled onto something strange, and it was not in deep space, but right here in our own solar system. She found a faint but consistent infrared emission at exactly 25.984 microns. No variance, just that one wavelength. She attached a spreadsheet with data and 3D renders. The shape is what's really weird. It's a lopsided arc that shoots straight from the sun's north pole for about 37 million kilometers, and then bends sharply down towards Venus. It widens into a funnel shape as it approaches Venus, and by the time it reaches the planet, the cross-section is as wide as Venus itself. She only caught it because she was running extremely sensitive equipment. She got confirmation that it was not an instrument error, and she's considered the obvious explanations. Space dust reflecting sunlight, some molecular compound absorbing the emitting energy, and the single wavelength thing could actually support that last idea. But the shape has her stumped. Her first instinct was magnetic field lines guiding particles, but Venus has no magnetic field, no magnetosphere, no ionosphere, so there's nothing obvious that would pull particles into that arc, and no reason they'd be glowing. She's reaching out for theories. What the heck was that? I had just relived that memory like it was a flashback in a movie. But here I am lying on the floor underneath a bed while robotic arms are trying to grab at me, and this memory came out of nowhere just because I thought of a thin red line. Okay, but what did I learn from that? I live in San Francisco, I like breakfast, and I guess I'm into astronomy, or at least used to be. Crazy that I can remember this, but not my own name. After examining my environment, I shimmy out the far side of the bed I'm under and am relieved to see that the arms can't reach me here. They just snap gently at their most extreme extensions. Time to wake up these other people, I think. So I stand up and they're dead. Gross. They are so dead. There's no smell of rotting, but they are partially mummified like they've been dead for a long time. One of them is a man and the other is a woman. These are mostly assumptions based on their frame size and hair length. Their features are pretty androgynous at this point. I think that I should be more horrified at this, but they're so unhuman looking at this point that it doesn't freak me out too much. They're basically just Halloween decorations. But if this was a quarantine zone, they'd have removed the dead long ago. I flatten my back against the wall and slide around the room so the arms can't reach me still. The next plausible action is to climb the ladder and try to undo the hatch. But as I reach up for the first rungs, I feel exhausted again and end up collapsing to the ground. What is going on with me? Am I diseased? Am I a cancer patient? How do I have such toned muscles if that's the case? I examine my body. There are no bandages or scars. I look like I'm in peak condition. But my trip to the ladder has left me breathless. Maybe it's a lung infection? I look up at the hatch as I gasp for air. I haven't even started to climb. How am I going to climb a 10-foot ladder, I think? Wait. Feet. Imperial units. So I'm American or Canadian, maybe English. Although I know for some weird reason that Liberia uses imperial units as well. But that seems less likely since I'm white. I know all of this, and I can't even remember my own name. I struggle up the ladder and make it maybe halfway before my muscles just give out and I fall. But I guess luckily the arms catch me because I fell backwards enough to be within range. They carry me back to my bed and tuck me in like the world's most terrifying mother. I'm too tired to fight back. My last thoughts before drifting off are about how the way I fell off the ladder is bugging me. Something just felt off about it. When I wake up, the computer is telling me to eat. One of the arms is holding a toothpaste tube out for me. I look at it suspiciously, but it's labeled Day 1, Meal 1, so I take it. I take off the cap and can immediately smell savory, even though this is basically a pate and doesn't look that appetizing, but oh man, does it taste better than anything I've ever eaten. Unbelievable. But as I think about the implications of labeled meals that aren't solid foods, I realize I've been in a medically induced coma, which means I probably had an NG tube down my throat that fed me nutrients. It's best practice to remove the NG tube while the patient is unconscious still, but that would explain why my throat felt so messed up when I first woke. How do I know all this? Am I a doctor? The food tastes so good and I'm not full when the tube is empty. Give me another tube, I tell the computer. It tells me my food allotment was met for now. I knew it was right. If you give a starving person the ability to eat as much as they like, they'll make themselves sick by overloading their digestive system. But that doesn't keep me from arguing with the computer. It's crazy how much better I felt after eating savory toothpaste, and I have just slept again for who knows how long. So I sit up, expecting to have to run away from the arms again, but this time they sit back, seemingly giving me permission. Well, that's an improvement, I guess. It's now that I can realize I'm still naked. Can I have some clothes? The computer doesn't respond. Fine. I grab the sheets off my bed and drape it around me like a toga. I walk around, and the computer takes that as a sign to me to ask its riddles again. What's your name? I am Emperor Comatose. Kneel before me. Incorrect, it replies. I don't care. I'm back at the ladder rungs. The climb is still very laborsome considering how muscular I look, but I can't put my finger on why. I make it to the hatch, and I find a crank that rotates the hatch open. As I watch the hatch move, revealing a new mystery, I say, holy moly! Wait, seriously? That's my go-to expression? Am I from the 1950s? I lift myself up into the next room, and motion-sensing lights flicker on to illuminate a laboratory. There is a large table mounted to the floor, and the walls have shelving mounted with all sorts of state-of-the-art equipment. Anything you can think of being in a lab, it was here. What the fudge is going on, I think? Wait, fudge? Really? Maybe I have young kids, or I'm just very religious? I see an 8,000 times microscope, a massive supply of beakers and test tubes, a 3D printer, milling machine, vacuum chambers. So I must be a scientist, and it's time to science my way through this. But all my genius brain can think of right now is how I'm still hungry. This room has another hatch in the ceiling, another ladder to climb. I'm strong enough to make these climbs now, but I can't get over how it feels heavy in some way. When I make it to this hatch, the computer greets me with its question once more. To unlock hatch, state your name. But I don't know my name, I yell. Incorrect, is all it says. Okay, this will have to wait. I start to descend the ladder, but misstep, and I go crashing down to the laboratory floor. My attempts to grab onto something on the fall only brought more equipment crashing down on top of me. The wind is knocked out of me as a drawer of supplies smacks me in the shin. A tape measure hits me in the middle of my forehead, and again, it felt weird. Once I'm able to stand, I decide to run a test. I find a stopwatch because, again, fully stocked lab, and I begin to test how long it takes for my sturdy plastic test tubes to fall to the ground. The first time is 0.37 seconds. That's pretty fast. I do it 10 more times, writing the results on my arm with a pen because I haven't found any paper yet. The average time ends up being 0.348 seconds. I run some basic physics calculations of acceleration, and the answer doesn't make me smile. The gravitational pull is 15 meters per second when it should be 9.8. This is 1.5 times stronger than Earth's gravity. That's when it hits me. I'm not on Earth. Okay, hold on. Let's not freak out. What other possibilities are there? I could be in a centrifuge, one of those spinning things that can simulate different levels of gravity. But for me not to feel the movement and be experiencing 1.5 Gs, that would have to be massive. And why would a massive centrifuge be the holding place for coma patients? I run another experiment. I create a simple pendulum with lab supplies and time how long it takes for it to come to a rest. In the lab, it took 346 cycles of swinging back and forth. I go back to my hospital room and run it again. 346. Again. With a centrifuge, the idea is that the further away you get from the center, the higher the gravity. So either I'm not in one, or it's just a really big centrifuge. I do some more math. In order for there to be a centrifuge big enough to not have a reaction in gravity like I should be experiencing, the radius would have to be almost a half-mile long and be spinning at hundreds of miles per hour. The math just keeps not adding up to explain that I could possibly be on Earth. Plus, why do I keep knowing all of these sciencey things about Earth's gravity versus space? Do I work for NASA or the ESA? Or I used to meet Marissa every Thursday night for steak dinners at Murphy's, always at 6 p.m. We'd met 20 years ago in grad school and she was dating my roommate. When I got to our table, the staff knew our tradition so well they made sure we always got the same seat. But when I got there, she had a couple empty lowball glasses in front of her. Pre-gaming? I asked teasingly. She doesn't laugh or smile. What's wrong? I ask. Marissa proceeds to tell me that a Japanese solar probe named Amaterasu has found some disturbing data. The sun's light is dimming. I shrug. So where are we in the cycle? She shakes her head. This is not the 11-year cycle. Even accounting for that, the sun is 0.01% less bright than it should be. Is that number big enough to justify 3 whiskeys before dinner, I ask? It's increasing, she said as she glared at me. Thanks to that probe, we caught it very early on, but the sun is consistently losing energy. Where's the energy going? I ask. She taps her hand to the table a few times impatiently before saying, the Petrova line. The probe ID to the Petrova line is increasing in brightness at the same rate the sun is losing it. Somehow or another, whatever it is, the Petrova line is stealing energy from the sun. She pulled out a bunch of documents that showed her data. I was still struggling to believe her. We both order another whiskey. I shake my head as the memory closes. What is this? I think to myself. I feel like I'm in some Christopher Nolan movie having these memories triggered by a word or sentence. But at least now I feel like I know whatever I'm doing here has something to do with the sun dying. I'm involved with trying to solve the Petrova problem, which apparently that line from that email I first remembered is now called the Petrova line after the person who discovered it. I'm back on the bottom floor. I look at my mummified roommates and suddenly I feel tears. I can't remember their names. I can't remember my name, but I know they were my crew. We were friends. I had vague memories about them. He was a rigid man, military, probably our leader. She was kind and always knew how to make you laugh. I'm on some sort of spacecraft, and we were its crew. But what I can't figure out is if I'm in space, 1, why am I experiencing gravity at all? But 2, why is it stronger than gravity on Earth? I realized we were not patients in a hospital room. Our comas were not treating any illness. They were to keep us alive through extended space travel. And suddenly the things I saw made sense. The tubes kept us fed and monitored our vitals. The mechanical arms likely changed our sheets and rotated us to avoid bed sores. There were electrodes that were used to stimulate our muscles, helping keep us strong. The fact that my dead crew had no tubes coming out of them makes me assume the computer knew to stop expending resources on anyone that died, to make sure that they could be used for any survivors. For me. The computer tells me it's time to eat again. I'm not really in the mood, but I can't deny that I am hungry. And this time, the paste tastes like chicken and vegetables. It's also slightly thicker. I think it's progressing towards giving me solid food, which excites me. I ask for water, and a ceiling panel opens to reveal a 1-liter container that the arm hands me. Once the food and emotions are behind me, I sit quietly and try to think about what I know. I start by asking myself what makes me happy. Well, science, apparently. I've gotten excited every time I think of a hypothesis to test about what's going on. Let's just focus on sciencey things, and maybe I'll have another memory. I pulled a TV dinner out of the microwave and sat it in front of the TV that was streaming a live feed. It had been a year since the announcement of the Petrova line stealing our sun's energy, and the whole world was working together to solve it. Project ArcLight had been the fastest space mission to come together, with the smartest brains working around the clock to get the ArcLight probe to Venus and back in record time so it could collect a sample of whatever was in the Petrova line. A reporter was inside the control station interviewing one of the lead scientists tonight as I ate. This announcement was that the ArcLight had reached Venus's orbit and would begin its 12 rotations around the planet, ensuring it had enough passes through the Petrova line to gather plenty of whatever was there. All we would be getting today would be some video and images of what it collected. It would take 3 months to get back home so we could study it. The reporter kept trying to fill airtime with more questions that someone who doesn't understand science would ask, but as soon as the first report came in from the ArcLight, the scientist being interviewed had no attention span left for the woman with the microphone. But they started to explain that what we were seeing was under a 10,000 times microscope, meaning that these little black dots we are seeing are only about 10 microns wide, meaning 0.001 centimeters or about 0.0004 inches. Just then, you heard a voice off camera swear in surprise. Gasps were heard from others in the mission control center. The reporter tried to play off the cursing with a comment about how high-spirited things were here tonight, but the scientist was also shocked enough that the reporter looked back at the large monitor herself before saying, "Are those particles moving?" And sure enough, broadcast to the entire world, the tiny black dots were drifting across the screen. I dropped my fork into my spaghetti. Suddenly, as terrifying as the Petrova problem was, I was pretty dang excited. I'm ripped from the memory as the computer voice tells me, "Angular anomaly." I don't know what that means. I ask the computer questions, but it's not helpful. It basically just tells me that something's not where it should be. I need to get through that second hatch, but I still don't remember my name. I return to my attempts at meditating my way to remembering who I am. I'm analyzing the things I remember from my last memory. I see my apartment. I can see the San Francisco skyline, but I already know I live there. That doesn't help me at all. I remember during my excitement about alien life thinking, I can't wait to tell the kids about this. But do I have kids? I look like I live alone with my sad TV dinner and very tidy apartment. Let's see, I'm a single man in my 30s who lives alone. I don't have kids, but I like kids a lot. I don't like where this is headed. Oh, I'm a teacher. Oh, thank goodness. I teach kids in school. Whew. That also explains why I say words like fudge and heck. And suddenly, I'm remembering being in my classroom. It's after the knowledge that the sun is dying, but it feels kind of normal. I guess if you lived in London during the Blitz in World War II, you kept going about your day as normally as you could, even if each night you knew your neighbor might get bombed into oblivion. So we were just dealing with that kind of apocalypse looming, but it was being caused by an alien life form this time. I was standing in front of a bunch of kids, and I was teaching them basic science. Because what's the point of even having a world if you're not going to pass it on to the next generation? My kids are laughing and are excited as I play their favorite game of Lightning Round, a pop quiz where you could earn bean bags that you cashed in for prizes at the end of the week. I had carefully crafted my reputation as the cool teacher. It had taken years, but I'm asking general science questions like, what are the 3 types of rocks and the real name of the North Star, when the bell rings and the kids all scamper off with their bags. I was about to head to the teacher's lounge for a cup of coffee before I started grading papers when I heard a woman's voice behind me. "Ryland Grace?" she said. I looked at her curiously. She was in her 40s, dressed in a business suit with a briefcase in tow, holding a tablet in one arm. Yeah, can I help you?" I asked. "I think you can." She had a European accent, but not one distinct enough for me to pin it down. "My name is Eva Strat. I'm from the Petrova Task Force." "What's that?" "It's the international task force assigned to solve the Petrova Line situation. They've given me a certain amount of authority to get things done." "Who are they?" "Well, every member of the UN to start." "I don't remember hearing anything about it." "It was a unanimous secret vote. Look, Mr. Grace, I want to talk to you about a paper you wrote." Wait, a paper I wrote? I mean, my time in academia didn't go so well." "You teach school," she said flatly. "You're still in academia." "Well, yeah, but I mean, academia with peer reviews and boards and the assholes who got you kicked out of your university?" I snapped my head to look into her eyes. "And who got all your funding cut off and ensured you never publish again?" "Yeah," I say slowly. "That." She took a bundle of papers out of her briefcase. I could see from the title page it was my paper. An analysis of water-based assumptions and recalibration of expectations for evolutionary models. "You wrote this?" I nod my head. "You have an entire section in here called The Goldilocks Zone is for Idiots, where you call out many of the leading scientists by name for believing temperature range is a requirement for life." "Yeah, but, and don't you contend that all life needs is a chemical reaction that results in copies of the original catalyst, and that you don't need water for that?" "Look, this is behind me. I got a teaching credential, and now I'm very happy here." "I assume you are up to date with ArcLight project?" I tell her I am. "Do you think those dots are alive?" she asks. I tell her I couldn't possibly know. They could just be reacting to magnetic fields. She tells me that the ArcLight returns in a few weeks, and that she wants me to do the testing to determine if they are alive or not. I stare at her blankly. I don't think I made a sound in response. She waved her hand in front of me. "Hello?" "You want me to look at the dots? You're in charge of solving this problem, and you came to a junior high science teacher?" "Yes," she said unironically. "This is crazy. I have to get going," I say as I turn around. "This is not optional," she replied. "Seems pretty optional to me," I said, and I walked off. But it turns out it wasn't optional. When I got home, there were 4 large men in black suits who turned out to be FBI agents who escorted me to an unmarked building that, once inside, seemed to be housing some sort of operation, maybe for this task force I was told about. I was walked into a pristine new laboratory where I found Eva Strat standing there waiting for me. "Hello, Dr. Grace. This is your new lab." I adjusted my clothes after the agents released me. "So, when you say a certain amount of authority..." "I have all the authority," she replied. I then learned that she had been an administrator in the ESA, but now she was just in charge of everything, apparently. She told me that committees slowed everything down. "Aren't there more qualified people than me to do this?" I asked. "Yes, but this organism, assuming it's alive, is stealing energy from the surface of the sun. Does that sound like a water-based organism to you?" She made a great point. "That's why I want you to look first. You're willing to consider possibilities most of them would not. The worldwide field of speculative extraterrestrial biology only has about 500 members, and everyone I've talked to says you could have led it if you hadn't exited academia." I'm surprised they'd say such nice stuff about me. I didn't exactly leave on good terms. "When the situation gets as serious as this, people tend to let go of personal grudges," Stratz said. "This is a chance for you to prove you were right, Dr. Grace." She got up to leave. "Be back here on the 23rd at 7 p.m. I'll have the sample for you." She had already told me that the ArcLight would be landing somewhere up in Siberia, so I asked how the sample would get here so fast. She told me that the Russians would deliver it to the Canadian Air Force, who would bring it to San Francisco with the U.S.'s permission to use airspace. "You can just get the Russians, Canadians, and Americans to all play ball like that?" "Without question," she responded. She wasn't even smiling. This just seemed natural to her for some reason. Yes! I pumped my fist as this memory closed. I now have my name. I rushed up to the mystery hatch and answered the computer's riddle. It felt so satisfying to finally get that out of the way. "Ryland Grace," I pronounced as it asked the question, and the hatch unlocked. As I entered my new domain, it starts out like the others, but tapers off at the other end into a cone. This room is nothing but an endless amount of screens and controls. Well, that and one large-looking door labeled airlock. There is a chair in the middle of everything. I sit in it. Pilot detected, the computer said, before repeating the warning from earlier. I see one screen blinking red. I lean in so I can read it. Angular anomaly. Relative motion error predicted velocity 11,423 kps. Measured velocity 11,872 kps. Status auto-correcting trajectory. No action required. I didn't understand what that meant, and even more, it was annoying that the computer had labeled it as a warning for me to then find out no action was required. But I guess I'd rather that be the case than for me to have to do something about it at this point. So I don't have a clue what's going on here. The other thing that stands out is the monitor with an image of the sun. At least I think it's an image. Maybe it's a live feed. I note a sunspot that's visible, and I log it in my memory to look at it later so I can tell if this thing is rotating. Then I start thinking about those numbers. 11,872 kps is really fast. But I look at the screen and see the number has dropped to 11,871. It's going down. I pull out the stopwatch from a fold in my toga, because are you going to try to tell me all great philosophers and scientists didn't carry stopwatches like this? I start to measure the time between drops in speed. The calculations I do make me put another piece of my puzzle together. I'm not experiencing gravity because of a planetary force or centrifuge. I'm just moving that fast. My ship is generating gravity itself. But now the question is, where am I going? I can't come up with any immediate answers, so I start examining the rest of the room. I see a mission crest. All crests include the name of the mission and the port of call, so that's why I see Earth written at the bottom, and at the top is the name of my ship, Hail Mary. Inside the outer ring where all the text was, the mission crest had a yellow circle with a dot in the middle, a blue circle, and a white cross with a smaller yellow circle with a lowercase t. I don't know how to take it all in. Around the edge of that were Chinese characters, a Russian word, and Grace. So these must be the crew names. One of my dead comrades was a Russian, and the other, Chinese. And again, without remembering anything specific about them, I hurt, thinking about the fact that they're gone. Another memory jolts into my head. This time, it's on the 23rd, the day the black dots arrived at this lab. I'm in a full hazmat suit with a clear vinyl panel in front for me to see out of. Strat is telling me over the intercom that I'll be fine. It's easy for her to say. She's got 2 thick walls and bulletproof glass between her and where I'm standing. There were about 20 people, all in military uniforms from different countries, around her in her room. I gesture to the ridiculousness of everything, tugging at my air hose. Is this really necessary? We may have an alien life form in that room. We're not taking any chances. You're not, I exclaimed, but I am. It's not like that, she said. How is it not like that? After a pause, she clicked the microphone again. Okay, it's exactly like that. I eventually turned my attention to the container that held the capsule of what might be first contact with alien life. It was a shell of 3 centimeters of lead plus 1 of steel. I opened the shell and I placed a sample of the interior under a microscope. And there they were. Dozens of little black dots all wriggling around. You recording this? I yelled over my shoulder. The microphone clicked on as Strat said that they had 37 different cameras angled around me. Are they alive? She asked. I can't just tell that from a glance, I say. Well, I need you to find out if they're alive and how they work. Well, that's a tall order. Why? Biologists figured out how bacteria works. Just do what they did. That took thousands of scientists hundreds of years, I yell. There was a pause before she answered. Well, do it faster than that. I sighed annoyedly before turning my focus back to my little dot friends. I spent the next 6 hours doing incremental tests. The military visitors got bored and left the room, leaving just me and Strat. After that time, she asked me what I'd learned. I shrugged. I was tired, also annoyed. Not at the work I was doing. I loved this opportunity. I was annoyed at having someone pushing me to come to a conclusion before I had confident answers. That's not how science works. Well, they absorb X-rays. Chromatography didn't work. I've tried burning them, baking them at extreme temps, but they're unaffected, which is very odd. But since they survive the sun's surface, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. But, I paused before the next sentence. I am pretty sure they are a life form. Strat asks what makes me think so, and I tell her that we already knew they emit light. That's how they were first discovered on the Petrova line. But I have now seen that they only emit light when they move. And for a single-celled organism, they emit a ton of light. I think light is how they move around. Strat looked confused, so I keep going. Believe it or not, light has momentum. It exerts force. If you were out in space and turned on a flashlight, that would create a tiny amount of thrust. And the light emissions I'm seeing compared to their movements stack up. I think they use light as propulsion. Nothing in our nature emits this amount of light in proportion to their mass. This is like E equals mc squared kind of stuff. So you're saying the light of the Petrova line is basically little rocket flares in mass? Probably. I still have no idea why they're going to Venus in the first place, though. What would you call an organism whose diet consists of eating stars? I thought about it for a moment. I jumbled around different Greek and Latin root words before I say, I think astrophage makes the most sense. Astrophage, Strat said as she typed it onto her tablet. Good. Now, get back to work. We need to find out how they breed. Now, back to my consciousness, the word astrophage feels like a revelation. That is the thing threatening life on Earth. I'm here because of astrophage. At this point, I'd been daydreaming for about 10 minutes, and my eyes drift to the image of the star that I was monitoring. But the sunspot had moved so much, it was off screen. Wait, that can't be, I thought. I run some more calculations based on the size of our sun, and the answer comes back indisputable. This sun is moving 10 times faster than it should be. I'm not looking at my sun. So not only am I in space, I'm in a different solar system. I freak out momentarily. I mean, I'm allowed that, right? I just woke up light years away from my home. I'm so dead. I start frantically looking at more of the readout screens in my control hatch. Life support, airlock status, astrophage, generator, centrifuge. Hold up. Astrophage? I look at the panel again and read its data. Remaining 20,906 kilograms. Consumption rate 6.045 grams per second. I find a diagram of the ship, including the fuel canisters. There are 3 of them, each massively larger than my actual spaceship living area. Each of the canisters was broken up into 9 sub-cylinders, and I start seeing blinking lights on several of those sub-cylinders that read astrophage 0.00 kilograms, and a button is flashing, prompting me to jettison. I'm not ready to commit to jettisoning anything quite yet, so I keep looking around, and the next panel was labeled spin drive. I don't know what that means, but the word drive makes me think it's a propulsion system, so I close my eyes and focus on the name spin drive to see if my memory can do its thing again. Nothing. So I turn my attention back to the fact that all of my fuel-related readouts are giving me numbers of astrophage? Is that my fuel? The thing killing my sun is also what's powering my ship? As I think about it, if we had figured out how to harness its energy, it would have been the most efficient fuel source known to man. The diagram of the ship also has temperature readings every few meters, each one reading 96.415 Celsius. And just like that, I'm back in another memory. I was looking at the number 96.415 degrees Celsius on the display. Strat asked why I looked confused. That's the ambient temperature of astrophage, I tell her. That's hot, right? Yeah, it's almost boiling temperature for water. It would be deadly for any life form on Earth, but we also can't survive on the sun like these guys do, so... Okay, but you look more surprised than that, Strat said. Well, it's because I can't change their temperature no matter what I do. I put it in ice water. I nuke it in a furnace. Both times it came out exactly at 96.415 degrees Celsius. But the water I put it in had warmed up, so it can expel heat while maintaining its own temperature. Hey, by the way, why aren't more people working on this? I asked Strat. There should be hundreds of scientists working on this problem. Trust me, there are many heads of state who want the exact same thing, but we're not ready. Why not? Because astrophage is an alien life form. What if it can infect humans? What if it's deadly? I gasped audibly. Wait a minute. Am I a guinea pig? No, it's not like that, Strat said. I stared at her, squinting my eyes angrily before she came back in over the microphone one more time. Okay, it's exactly like that. Not cool, I yell. Don't be dramatic, she snaps back. You know this is the safest way to go about this. My latest tests hadn't given me any new info. I'd blasted them with gamma rays, which should have reacted like a 50 cal bullet going through a sheet of paper, but these guys bounced them off harmlessly. I browsed the lab for new tests to run. I found nanosyringes. These were rare and expensive, but of course, Miss Acting Queen of the World made sure that we had them. These were small enough you could poke a microorganism. Okay, you little reprobates, I mumbled to my black dots. You're radiation proof, but how about I stab you in the face? I carefully bring in the syringe until I see the tiny head poke through my field of view on the microscope. I hold my breath as I poke one of the astrophage with the needle point. I don't know how to react to what happened next. The instant I poked a hole in it, the whole cell became translucent. No longer a featureless black dot, but a cell with organelles and everything else a microbiologist like me wants to see. Just like that. It was like flicking a switch, and then it died. The ruptured cell wall simply gave up the ghost and completely unraveled. The astrophage went from being a cohesive, roundish object to a slowly widening puddle with no outer boundary. I grabbed a normal needle from the nearby shelf and sucked up the goop. Yes, I said. I killed one! Good for you, Strat said without looking up from her tablet. First human to kill an alien, just like Arnold Schwarzenegger in Predator. I held back from telling her that technically the first human to kill a predator was Danny Glover's character Michael Harrigan in Predator 2, but I have bigger fish to fry. Now I can finally find out what they're made of. How did you do it? Strat asked. I penetrated the outer cell membrane with a nanosyringe. There was a pause. So, you poked it with a stick? Technically, yes. I spent some time examining the contents of the microcorpse before Strat heard me grumble, and she asked what I'd found. There's carbon and nitrogen, but the majority of the sample is hydrogen and oxygen. The ratio is 2-to-1. Meaning, Strat asked, it's water. Astrophage is mostly water. But how? She asked. I don't know. Probably has something to do with its ability to maintain its temperature below boiling point. What does this mean? She asked. It means every scientific paper I ever wrote is wrong. That memory was not what my little space-bound self needed right now. To find out that not only am I trapped in space alone, but that I wasn't even good at science. While I'd examined the different readouts inside of the control room, I realized there was a storage container under the dormitory. I spent a longer amount of time than I'd like to admit figuring out how to get the floor panel to open so I could access the storage, but when I did, jackpot. The storage compartment was the full circumference of the dormitory, but it was only about a meter tall, so I had to crawl around as I pulled a large number of soft-shell zippered containers out and started rifling through the contents. The first one I opened up had jumpsuits, which makes sense. If people wake up naked, the first thing they're going to want to do is look for clothes. As I pulled different suits out, their labels helped me piece together the identities of my dead comrades. The first one had big letters CNSA on them. I recognized it immediately as the Chinese National Space Agency. The name on it was the same symbol I'd seen under the mission crest, but it was also spelled out in my own alphabet. Yao. So he was the commander. Yes, now I had some memories. He was a stern man, military background, but easy enough to get along with. He didn't mess around when it came to fulfilling his mission. I pulled out the second uniform. It was smaller, it had the symbols of the Russian Space Agency, and under the Russian symbols for her name, I read the word Ilyukina. Olesia. That was her name. Olesia Ilyukina. She was the most hilarious person I'd ever met. How had she become an astronaut while being as silly as she was? She and Yao, I remember, could butt heads sometimes, but she always managed to crack a smile even from the hardened commander. Lastly, I found one with an American flag on it, and stitched into it was my name, Grace. I swapped out my toga and then went out about the grim task of giving my comrades the send-off they deserved. After putting each one in their uniform and wrapped in a sheet, I dragged them up to the control room, and while choking down tears, I released them one by one through the airlock. If you'd given your life in pursuit of the stars, there was no better place for you to end up. As I pressed the button to release the outer airlock to eject each of them, I mumbled, I commend your body to the stars. It's probably corny, but I felt better saying it, and as soon as they were gone, I don't know how, but I felt even more alone. And that's when I have another flashback. I'm in class again. I've been relieved of my duties with Eva Strat. Now that I had gone 3 days without dying or getting sick, they felt it was safe for real scientists to start working on the problem. My kids were more excitable than usual, a mixture of seeing me again after an absence, but everyone was buzzing about the knowledge that the arc light had returned. They had all sorts of questions about the sun dying. At first I answered them honestly. I hated when adults hid the truth from young minds. It was just disrespectful, in my opinion. But after seeing the way their faces fell, when I said that we would likely see an ice age that would lead to catastrophic crop failures and animal extinctions, I held back. Climatologists were expecting this to happen within 30 years. 30 years. Just as these bright faces would be old enough to be burdened with running the world, or whatever was left of it. They would be the generation that experienced the 6th extinction event. And I felt sick. As I looked out at their faces again, I couldn't lie to myself as I considered how many of them would likely die of starvation. I have to go. I have to do a thing, I said, and told them to use this hour as study hall, do their homework for other classes, stay quietly in your seats until the bell rings. I could barely keep my feet as I rushed down the hall. I wanted to collapse in a fit of despair. I drove back to the lab I'd spent the last few days in, and I rushed past security guards who I heard debating if they should have stopped me after I'd already gone by. I marched until I got to the room that Strat was in. She was still observing the lab, but now there were a number of other scientists where I had been. I demanded to know who those people were in my lab. It's not your lab, she said without a fleck of emotion. Well, what are they doing? Your dream is coming true, she said. We're dividing up the astrophage and delivering it to 30 labs around the world. But I want to do more work on them, she tisked. I'm afraid you've done your part, Dr. Grace. Just leave some of it here for me to work on. I had unknowingly taken a step forward in my anxiousness, but it may have read as aggressive. Strat, however, met me, taking her own step forward and saying, No, I don't have enough astrophage to give you some just to satisfy your ego. Ego? I exclaimed. This isn't about my ego. It's about my kids. You don't have kids, Dr. Grace. Yes, I do. Dozens of them. I see them every day, and they're going to end up living in a Mad Max nightmare world if we don't solve this problem. I don't care if the life forms are water-based or not. I only care about those kids. She took a step back. Her face pinched, as if she was considering something. She finally said, You can have 3 astrophage. I felt all the muscles in my tense body loosen slightly. Okay, I can work with that. She typed away at her tablet as she told me she'd keep this lab open and it's all mine to use. Just give her men a few hours to clear out. But at this point, I was already halfway into my containment suit, and as she said this, I said, I'm going back to work now. Just tell your guys to stay out of my way. Huh, I thought as I sat back in the pilot seat. So I'm doing this for my kids. I get back to work trying to piece together my situation. I noticed one panel that has readouts for beetles. What the heck are those? As I examine them more, I come to realize I have 4 unmanned probes on board, each of them with their own supply of astrophage fuel and hard drives for up to 5 terabytes of storage, each one named after one of the all-time greatest musicians, John, George, Paul, and Ringo. Why do I have these, I think? Oh. I look at my fuel panels again, and first of all, I'm amazed at how efficient astrophage is as fuel. I'm moving at 1.5 Gs of acceleration on a few grams of fuel per second. But the reality becomes clear. This was a one-way trip. There wasn't nearly enough fuel to make the trek back to Earth. These beetles were how I was going to send any potentially sun-saving findings back home. I'm going to die out here, alone, in space. The way I discovered how astrophage breeds was quite the happy accident. At one point, I had the idea to simulate the infrared levels of Venus, since that is where the astrophage was heading. I created a completely dark, completely sealed room to put the 3 little dots that had been left to me with an IR emitter that was dialed exactly to the level of Venus. That did nothing initially, but the astrophage was clearly targeting Venus for some reason. I mean, Mercury is closer. So I asked myself, if I'm not allowed to measure infrared light, how else could I distinguish one planet from another? Then it hits me. Spectroscopy. I look for carbon dioxide levels. I re-rigged the black room to measure for Venus's carbon dioxide rating and placed Larry, Curly, and Moe in their tray. I mean, you're trying to tell me you wouldn't name your 3 little dots that you spent all day every day with? Once they were sealed, I looked at my monitor and flipped the switch. The astrophage left. It happened so fast. For a second, I wondered if I'd knocked something over, but no. I had distinctly seen them on screen, and then they vanished. After some very panicked searching, using a very sensitive heat detection tool, I found them scattered inside the darkroom, except there were 4 of them. To keep this brief, here is the hypothesis I worked up over the next 36 hours. Astrophages spend their time on the surface of the sun, soaking up energy and storing it internally. Once they've built up enough energy, they migrate, first shooting straight up from the sun's north pole along magnetic field lines, which gets them clear of the sun's blinding light and gives them a full view of Venus's orbital path. From there, they lock onto Venus using its massive carbon dioxide spectral signature, specifically the 4.26 and 18.31 micron light bands, and fly straight towards it, using infrared light as propellant. That arc they travel is the Petrova line. When they reached Venus's upper atmosphere, they collect the CO2 they need to finally reproduce. Since the sun has plenty of hydrogen but lacks the carbon and oxygen required for the complex proteins that make up their biology. After reproducing, both parent and offspring head back to the sun, and the whole cycle starts over. Get energy, get resources, make copies. Once I was confident enough about my findings to report them to Strat, I was almost immediately approached by a couple army men who had been standing guard over my lab. They told me to follow them. "Well, let me get my samples," I said. "They're already being prepared by lab techs. Just come with me now." Okay. I then spent the next 12 hours hopping from different jet fighters to helicopters and eventually onto a Chinese aircraft carrier in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. By the time I landed, I was exhausted. I would have definitely thrown up multiple times if I hadn't been given a pill when I loaded into the first cockpit. I was ushered into a room below deck where I found Strat standing at the head of a large table. "Dr. Grace, how was your trip?" I started to animatedly tell her about how rough of an experience I just had when she cut me off, saying she only asked as a formality. She then introduced me to the entire room as Dr. Ryland Grace, the man who figured out how to breed astrophage. One man started to talk loudly in German before Strat cut him off. "Nur, English." The man switched to English. "Why are we just hearing about this now?" Strat told him that she had wanted to confirm my findings first, and that she could now say confidently she had only left me 3 astrophage, but I have now brought back 4. When I was asked to sit down and tell everyone what I had done first, I demanded to know who these people were. "This is the international body of scientists and politicians spearheading Project Hail Mary." "Project what now?" "That will take a lot to explain, Dr. Grace. Everyone here is anxious to hear what you have to say." After I told my story of infrared light and CO2 experiments, the same German guy raised his hand asking if I could replicate this at a mass scale. "I guess," I said, "but I don't know how quickly they'd double." One woman at the table with a thick Chinese accent looked up from her phone and said their scientists had just reproduced the results. Another at the table asked how they had possibly done this so fast, and Strat just said, "Spies, presumably," as if she didn't care. The Chinese woman said they were estimating doubling to take about 8 days if conditions are optimal. Other scientists seem to have a lot more questions about how much astrophage could be produced and if it would be enriched astrophage, meaning cells that were carrying their full capacity of energy like the ones leaving the sun to Venus. I had no clue what they were talking about. All I could tell is they were getting more excited as they considered the possibility of something they hadn't yet told me about. But when they reasoned out that they had realized they could have upwards of 2 million kilograms of astrophage in about 16 months, everyone got very excited. "We may just have a chance," one of them said. "An outside chance," another chimed in more cautiously. "But there is hope," a Japanese woman said. "Hope for what?" I asked desperately. Strat told me I needed to sleep and called for a sailor to take me to a bedroom, promising that I would know all about Project Hail Mary soon enough. I slept for 14 hours on a cot. That's how tired I was after all of that travel. And when I woke up, there was a Post-it note stuck to my forehead. It said, "Clean clothes and toiletries in the duffel under your bunk. Show this note to any sailor when you've cleaned up." Below that were a series of Chinese characters. The note was signed by Strat. I was led to a room with a buffet of rice, steamed buns, deep-fried dough sticks, and as much coffee as I could handle. I began to stuff myself as I asked Strat all the questions that had been in my head. There were a few other people in the room, including the German guy from earlier who turned out to be the German Minister of Foreign Affairs. There was a Russian guy in a military uniform and a Chinese scientist named Xi. Why are we in the middle of the ocean? The answer that Strat gave me was that commercial air travel is too slow and unpredictable. She needed things to happen fast. Military aircraft travel at supersonic speed on whatever schedule they're needed. Okay, next question. What is Project Hail Mary? That's when I got the real insight that changed everything. Our sun is not the only star getting dimmer. I reasoned out how that actually made sense since we knew astrophage could travel at 0.92 times the speed of light, but it's then pointed out to me that the astrophage have been traveling from system to system, infecting one star after another. At this point, Xi asked if I knew about Tau Ceti. I said, yeah, it's a star about 12 light years away from us. 11.9, she said, seeming impressed. Most people don't know that. Well, when you teach junior high science, these things come up. As soon as I said that, Xi and the Russian looked at each other in surprise before glancing at Strat. She gave them a flat stare and said, there's much more to him than that. I realized I had just tanked my credibility to these people. What about Tau Ceti? I asked, trying to take the focus off of me. It's not infected, Xi said. Every star around it within 8 light years is, but Tau Ceti is untouched. Why? I said incredulously. Strat came in with a reply. That's what we're going to find out. We're going to make a ship and send it there. I snorted out a laugh. You can't just make an interstellar ship. We don't have that technology. The Russian smiled, saying, actually, my friend, we do. Strat introduced him as Dr. Komarov, but he insisted I call him Dmitri. Dmitri then explained that astrophage has opened up the possibility of interstellar travel for the first time ever. Dmitri's team figured out what astrophage does with its heat. They had hit a single cell with a 1 kilowatt laser for 25 minutes. That's 1.5 megajoules total. And the cell just absorbed it without getting any hotter. Then it stopped accepting energy, like it was full. When they weighed it before and after, it had gained 17 nanograms in a vacuum, so no outside material to account for it. That's when it clicked. E equals mc squared. Astrophage is converting energy directly into mass to store it, and then converting that mass back into energy when it needs it, releasing it as Petrova frequency infrared light that it uses as propellant. So it's not just a nearly perfect energy storage system, it's also its own engine. The same mechanism that lets it stockpile energy from the sun is what drives it across space. I liked this Dmitri guy already and asked if we could just hang out sometime. He agreed with a smile before Strat asked us to focus up. That's when things finally clicked in. The 2 million kilograms, all the questions about mass reproduction, they were going to farm enough astrophage to travel to Tau Ceti. I mean, heck yeah, this was the most efficient fuel source we'd ever discovered, so why not shoot for the stars? No pun intended. They wanted to know if I could make the breeding facility to start the doubling process of astrophage. I said I could, but just asked if I could take a commercial jet home. I was not a fan of the parade of military flights I'd experienced coming here. You are home, Strat said in her iconic, emotionless way. The flight hangar has been cleared out for you. Just tell us what you need to set up your facility, and we'll bring it to you. I looked at the others for any sign that this was a joke. No one was even close to smiling. Why can't you just be normal, Strat? If you want military travel, fine, but just work from an airbase like a normal person. Because, Dr. Grace, Strat said, more strained than I was used to seeing her, we will be experimenting with a bunch of astrophage once we breed it up. Enough energy will be housed in the facility that if something went wrong, it would result in the largest nuclear explosion the world has ever seen. So we'd rather be in the middle of the ocean where we won't eradicate any cities. Oh, I said, instantly humbled. And the more astrophage we make, the farther out to sea we will go. But I can have our carpenters build you any accommodations or offices you need. Just tell me what you want. Dmitri smiled as he leaned over to pat me on the shoulder. This is your life now. Welcome. Okay, if you haven't noticed, I have not done any interruptions to the story so far, which is kind of atypical. But as you can also tell, this is a first-person narration, much like the last book. But with this one, I decided that I wanted to tell it as a first-person narration as well, whereas I would typically translate it from a first person to a third. I don't know, it just felt right for this one, but that meant that I felt like breaking out for a random fact or additional context every half chapter or so just took you out of it too much. So I decided to cluster my fun facts for this book into smaller groupings. So here's my first cluster for you. And most of these will be expounding on the science of the book for other dummies like me who don't know that much about the world we live in. First up, I'm going back a few chapters to his memory of his dinner night with his friend who first told him the sun was dimming. his response had been, well, where are we at in the cycle? She dismisses that comment, saying this has nothing to do with the cycle. So did you know our sun goes through cycles? It's an 11-year cycle, to be precise, and here is about as plain of an explanation as I could get. The sun runs on roughly 11-year cycles of magnetic activity, swinging between a quiet solar minimum and a more chaotic solar maximum, driven by the sun's differential rotation, gradually twisting and tangling its own magnetic field lines. The effects on Earth can range from harmless and even beautiful, like the auroras being seen further towards the equator, but they can also be more dangerous, like solar flares that emit X-rays that can disrupt radio communications and GPS almost instantly, and coronal mass ejections pose a serious infrastructure threat when they strike Earth's magnetosphere. In 1989, the Quebec blackout was caused by a geomagnetic storm that took down the entire provincial grid in 90 seconds. The 1859 Carrington event, which I'm not even going to bother explaining, is the most powerful recorded solar storm on record, which, if it happened today, could potentially cause trillions of dollars in damage and knock out power for months across large parts of the planet. So here's to hoping we don't have another Carrington event anytime soon. It's frightening sometimes to realize how fragile our world is, not just due to political tensions or resource scarcity, but just in the face of nature itself. Next up, if you have seen the movie, you may have already picked up on the fact that the book is way more sciencey, which is to be expected. Hollywood always dumbs down the science because we don't pay this money for a college lecture, right? And I have even been drastically simplifying the explanations for a lot of what I've shared, even though I'm going more into the science than the movie does. But I've tried to keep enough of it for you to understand the significance of each step along the way. Andy Weir is a very intellectual, science-focused man himself, so he loves this part of creating his stories. He has even said in interviews he won't write a plotline if he can't base it strongly in scientific possibility. And like any epic sci-fi, the things explored are far from proven or even probable, but they are possible. I watched one tele-interview with Weir where he screen shared an Excel doc with massive amounts of data points about all of the different science claims he uses in this story. And not just the real ones either. He has massive amounts of facts that he made up for astrophage and other parts of the story, just so when he's writing about it, he knows exactly how this fictitious substance would react in certain circumstances. He creates his own rules for his fictional world so the story feels grounded, like any good author does, whether it's historical fiction, fantasy, or sci-fi. He even was quoted as saying that it used to bug him when readers would say they kind of skim over the science explanations in his books because he'd worked so hard on making the fake science real. But eventually, he learned to appreciate that this meant the reader trusted him, which is true, but also, you ain't getting me to take the effort to truly understand everything going on scientifically. Because you're talking to the guy who took one college-level chemistry class in high school so that I could go my entire college degree taking 0 science classes. If I could go back, I probably would have been interested in taking some physics, but I have just never been the most scientifically minded person. And I know, you guys are gasping in shock to realize the man who breaks down the structure of stories in his free time isn't big on biology or astronomy. So if I were to summarize my approach to understanding the science in this book and how I've packaged it up for you, let's just say I explored it as long as I found it interesting. And as soon as I was losing interest in the hard facts, as long as I'd made enough sense of it to enrich the narrative, I called it there. Which leads us to my last point before we submerge in the story again for several chapters. E equals MC squared. Please tell me I'm not the only person who has known about this equation basically my whole life but has never been able to explain what it means. Well, thankfully I've got an answer since this story has tied it in so cleanly. Here is a brief explanation of Einstein's most popular equation, as well as why it's significant to Project Hail Mary. E equals MC squared says that mass and energy are the same thing in different forms. Mass is just frozen energy, and energy is just released mass. Most people thought of matter and energy as completely separate things, but Einstein showed they're really just two states of the same underlying stuff, and you can convert between them. It's one of those ideas that sounds simple until you actually sit with it. The c in the equation is the speed of light, about 186,000 miles per second. You're squaring that number, which makes it astronomically large. So when you multiply even a tiny amount of mass, or m, in the equation by that number, the energy you get out is staggering. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. A paperclip, fully converted, could power a city. And that's not an exaggeration, that's just the math. What makes it so wild in the context of astrophage is that converting mass to energy, or energy to mass, is something we've only done in extreme, violent, and uncontrolled ways like nuclear bombs or particle accelerators. It takes enormous effort and infrastructure for humans to coax even a small amount of mass into releasing its energy. Astrophage does it casually, in both directions, as a biological function. It eats sunlight, turns that energy into physical mass to carry around like a battery, then flips it back into energy on demand to fly through space. That is not only impressive chemistry, but it's a living thing doing the most fundamental trick in the universe like it's nothing. So now hopefully you less scientific types like myself can appreciate how Andy Weir did a really cool thing here, turning real science into a completely fake but kind of plausible storyline. Okay, enough science talk, back to the story, which is also very science heavy. Okay, so I'm going to die, but at least I can give meaning to my death. I start thinking about the painless ways I could end my life as I munch on a tube of day 4 meal 2. It's beef flavored and getting chunkier and chunkier every meal. I ask the robot arms for more water and they hand me a fresh one. Funny how those things terrified me when I first woke up. Well, I can't remember any of the details in between, but the fact that I'm here would indicate that Project Hail Mary was a success. But just because I don't know what I'm doing here doesn't mean I don't have 1,000 or more questions. Here are a few of the big ones. How do I scour an entire solar system for information about astrophage? What am I supposed to do? Throw some of my astrophage fuel at Tau Ceti to see what happens? Or how do I steer this ship anyway? If I do find useful information, how do I tell Earth about it? I think that's what the Beatles are for, but how do I upload data to them? How do I aim them? How do I launch them? And why should I, of all people, be part of this mission? Yes, I worked out a bunch of stuff about astrophage, but so what? I'm a lab coat, not an astronaut. It's not like they sent Werner von Braun into space. Surely there were more qualified people than me. But there's no point getting lost in the sauce of trying to figure out everything at once. Let's start small. I need to figure out how to control my ship. There must be a manual somewhere. They had to have known being in a coma that long might mess with our minds. Flight manual, I say out loud. Ship information can be found in the control room, came that computer voice that I'd learned to dislike so much. Where? Ship information can be found in the control room. No, I mean, where in the control room can I find the ship information? Ship information can be found in the control room. You kind of suck, I say. Okay, I actually have to stop in here to say that I related to this so much. I have such a short fuse when it comes to voice-activated tech misunderstanding me. I have said much worse things to voice-activated tech when it mishears me like this. But back to Grace. I begin to examine the panels in the control room more closely. I see one I hadn't noticed before called Petrovoscope. It was currently reading that the Petrovoscope cannot be activated while the spin drive is running. I don't know what a Petrovoscope is, but I have to assume it's a camera specifically for looking at astrophage readouts. All I know about my spin drives are that they are my engine, which apparently runs off astrophage. So I quickly intuit that I cannot use a Petrovoscope while the engines are running because I'm using so much astrophage energy that even with my engines outputting behind me, it would give off enough energy that the Petrovoscope could be compromised. Got it. But I cannot wait to investigate if Tau Ceti has a Petrovo line, because if it doesn't, our hope may be misplaced. But if it does, and it's not growing dimmer, we might just have a shot at salvation. All this time analyzing my ship's controls, I've avoided touching anything. The worst way to die in space would be because I accidentally hit the wrong button. So I look at my speed, 7,595 kps. Wow, it had been over 11,000 a couple days ago. I'm decelerating quite a bit, but this time I noticed one data point I hadn't seen before. Time to engine cutoff, 5 days, 20 hours, 39 minutes, and 6 seconds. The counter on that readout had 4 digits in the day area, so that likely means my journey has been over 1,000 days minimum, meaning it's been at least 3 years since I left Earth. But I don't know how to narrow it down any more than that because I know Tau Ceti is 12 light years away from our system, but then you have to factor in relativity, and it gets complicated really fast. I think about what the best case scenario looks like on Earth. Even if I find a solution quickly, roughly 26 years will have passed of the sun getting dimmer before I can get them their solution. No wonder they needed us to move as fast as possible. Was that why they put us in comas? I think about how that decision killed 2 of my friends, and I wipe my eyes as I try to refocus. Okay, I have 5 days until engines cut. The best use of my time is to figure out as much as possible about this ship while I'm still flying through space. Then I can fire up the petroscope once the engines are cut. I had another memory soon after that. This time it was Strat overseeing my breeding facility. It was crude and still not creating that much astrophage, but it was the most productive we'd been able to create so far. I visited Strat in her conference room. She looked rough. "What's up?" I asked. She says she has to make some very tough decisions the next day or two. "Well, how can I help?" "We only have a crew compartment of 125 cubic meters. That's tiny." "Isn't that actually kind of big for a spaceship?" "For a capsule, sure, but it's 1/10 the size of the International Space Station's crew compartments." "Okay, so what's the problem?" She had her head in her hands. "The crew will kill each other." "What?" I asked. She then told me of a piece of space race history I had never heard before, that in an effort to top the Americans, the Russians had made an attempt to go to Mars in the 70s, so that the moon landing would look pathetic. As part of that effort, they ran extensive tests on what happens when you put a crew in a tiny space for an extended period of time, since it would take 8 months to travel to Mars with their current tech. Just over 2 months in, the men were getting into fistfights every day. Just after the 3-month mark, they ended the experiment because one of the subjects tried to stab another with a broken glass. And in the case of Hail Mary, on top of the natural tensions, the crew knows they are not coming back. Try letting that not get to you for years of space travel in tiny compartments. She went on to tell me she was looking into a company from Thailand who had tried to make a long-term coma option with the goal of putting chemotherapy patients under for the course of their treatment, only to wake up once their cancer was in remission. The company had failed because the coma turned out to be dangerous unless you had a specific gene makeup that is only found in 1 of 7,000 people, a coma resistance, as it was being called. Strat goes on to tell me that the coma would make everything a lot easier. Food could be a simple coma slurry that doesn't require as much space or diversity, and on top of everything already mentioned, it would reduce the potential of sexual tension getting in the way. Oh, yeah, by the way, Strat was pissed that she was being forced by many national leaders to include 1 female astronaut in the name of equality or progress or something. Her main argument about how she wasn't being sexist was just that there were way more male astronauts, so reserving 1 slot for a woman was risking not sending the most qualified person. But on top of that, she was concerned that that would introduce the risk of a sexual dynamic between 3 people, which was just one more variable she didn't want to have to deal with. So she was grappling with having to figure out this 1 in 7,000 issue. It would be very hard to find a highly qualified set of 3 astronauts. 6. 6? Yes, we need redundancies. Backups at every position in case someone dies or gets sick or backs out at the last minute. Well, it sounds like you've already made up your mind, I tell her. You just needed someone to hear the plan before you confirmed your choice. Besides, I said softly, we're already asking these people to die. If we can remove years of internal suffering before that happens, shouldn't we do them that service? Both the science and the morality point to this direction. And as that memory closed, I thought to myself that I must be here because I am one of the rare 1 in 7,000 despite not being a trained astronaut. Over the next few days, I cataloged the entire lab so I know every tool and device available to me. My favorite part was when I discovered my laptops have access to literally every textbook or scientific paper ever written, as well as the entire Library of Congress. There were so many reference manuals. They gave me manuals on stuff that couldn't possibly be useful to me, but I guess when they want me to be prepared for literally anything, prepping me with every piece of human knowledge doesn't hurt as long as it fits on a hard drive. I also learned how the Beatles work. When it comes time to send them home, after I've uploaded all the world-saving data, I basically just hit a launch button and turn them loose. They orient themselves by star positions, point their way back to Earth all on their own. It's pretty slick. But I try not to feel insulted that this was likely done to prevent human error. I also found a screen that filled me in on everything EVA or extravehicular activity, spacewalks. At a certain point, I couldn't find anything else useful to do before the engines cut off. I was not looking forward to this. I'm not a big roller coaster guy. I feel much happier with gravity firmly connecting me to Earth, or, well, I guess at least my spaceship surface. The seconds ticked down before the complete cutoff. 3, 2, 1. Here we go, I whispered, and right on cue, the engines cut off, and just like that, my feet leave the floor. I am not going to lie to you. I had a full-on panic attack. I scream and flail. I can't reach any surfaces to pull myself to the wall. Why hadn't I strapped myself to the chair before the timer went out? I got a little secret for you guys who think 0 Gs sounds like fun, because you know what it actually feels like until you get adjusted to it? It feels like you're falling constantly, just always falling. I could feel my last meal coming back up my throat, but I didn't want to puke filling the entire cabin, so I hurry and unzip my flight suit just in time to vomit into my shirt. It's so gross, but better than having it floating around the entire room. Get yourself together, Ryland. Humanity cannot die because you couldn't handle 0 G. I'm able to frantically swim my way. It probably looked more like a wet cat trying to escape a tub if anyone could have seen it. But anyway, I swim my way to the bulkhead so I can kick off in the direction of my dormitory. I want to change out of this vomit container I'm currently wearing. As I worked my way there, I cursed myself more. The entire lab and dormitory were full of floating objects that I hadn't thought to secure or pack away while I still had gravity. You idiot, I thought to myself. My navigation isn't smooth either. My kickoffs sent me crashing into walls and pummeling into hatchway doors instead of through the open slots. But once I got fresh clothes on and I had a little more practice, I have to say, it was pretty fun. I waste no time and get the petroscope active. It took me a while to locate Tau Ceti with the petroscope, which honestly felt like I was using an old submarine periscope, except that I could use my fingers on the screen to zoom in and out. Bet old submarine captains would have loved having that ability. But once I find Tau Ceti, I have to fidget with the controls quite a bit to dial in the astrophage frequency, because it's a very specific IR reading. But in the end, I find a switch that does all that work for me automatically. I mean, that makes sense. This tool was designed to find one specific readout, wasn't it? And as I flip the switch, the stars go black. All that is left of Tau Ceti is a hazy outline at first. But after a few moments of searching, there it is. A dark pink red arc of light coming out of the bottom left portion of the star. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I clapped my hands. I wiggled in my seat. Tau Ceti has a Petrova line. My mind starts racing with experiments I could do and should do, but suddenly there's a flash on the screen. What's this? I look at the screen and there's another shape emitting light. It's irregular, but it's definitely noticeable. Slowly the light gets brighter and brighter. Is it heading for me? Is astrophage from Tau Ceti sensing the astrophage of my fuel tanks and it's coming looking for its relatives? I watch curiously as the light grows brighter and brighter, and then it's gone. What? I exclaimed. I sat there for a minute, still no more light. I eventually shrug it off and turn my attention back to the Petrova line, but as I do, it's gone. Not entirely. I can still see it emitting from the bottom of Tau Ceti, but halfway down the line that I had just seen minutes ago, it blacks out. I zoom in on the petroscope. The line can't just disappear, but that was when I saw it. The line hadn't disappeared. Something was blocking it. An object, not more than a few kilometers away from my ship. It's roughly triangular in shape and had protrusions along the hull. Yes, you heard me. I said hull. This shape was not an asteroid or anything natural. It was a ship. There's another ship in the system with me. Those flashes of light, those were its engines. It also must be astrophage powered, just like the Hail Mary. But the design, the shape, it's nothing like any spacecraft I've ever seen. The whole thing is made of huge, flat surfaces, the worst possible way to make a pressure vessel. No one in their right mind would make a ship that shape. Well, I mean, no one on Earth would, anyway. I blink a few times at what I'm seeing. I gulp. This is an alien spacecraft made by aliens. Humanity is not alone in the universe, and I've just met our neighbors. Holy I can't shut my brain off. This is an alien ship. Why does it look so weird? I'm not alone out here? Is this their home system? Am I starting an interstellar incident by wandering to their territory? Okay, breathe, Ryland. I do some simple math and figure out the ship is 139 meters long. The Hail Mary, it maxes out at 47 meters long. This is 3 times as big as me. But I can't get over the shape of this thing. I'm not even really going to try to explain what it looks like because you won't be able to understand just from my words. Just know it's nothing like what you'd expect a spaceship to look like. But mostly I can't get over how many flat panels are part of the construction, which is a terrible idea. It's the least aerodynamic thing you can do. Not to mention that it's terrible for maintaining an atmosphere inside. But I have to catch myself and acknowledge that this is the most exciting moment in human history and I'm critiquing their ship's design. The fact that they could see my ship tells me they likely have the ability to see the Petrover frequency as well. I go through the extensive dialogue and warning options to unlock manual controls of my ship, and when I finally have the ability to move it, I run some tests. Because the ship had come to a standstill parallel with the Hail Marys. So I turn my engines on to 0.1% power for 1 second, and then I turn it off. I jet forward a little bit, my heart racing as I wait to see what happens next. The other ship's engines turn on for just a flash, and it pulls up next to me. I repeat this process several times, sometimes with longer thrusts, each time the other ship matched my movement. This is definitely intelligent life on board that ship. I can't decide if I should be laughing or crying in terror. So far, there are no signs of aggression, but I have no clue what they're like. But as I'm watching, I see something sliding along its hull. It's almost like a robot on a railing. From this distance, I can see that it makes some movement, almost like a catapult. And then suddenly, my monitors are warning me that while blip A is stationary, there's now a blip B heading towards my ship. It's moving almost agonizingly slow. My computer reads it at 8.6 centimeters per second. I'll save you the calculation and just say that's slower than a snail's pace. It's as if they want to guarantee that I have time to react and catch whatever this is. Or maybe it's just the cruelest way to deliver a bomb. But all indications so far are that these are friendly aliens, so I hope for the best. I hurry into my EVA suit and get in the airlock. I'm about to open the exterior hatch when I pause. What am I doing? Is this really a good idea? I have no plan, no procedure to determine if this is safe. Is this worth risking my life? I can't come up with any answer other than yes, but I realize this is just me talking. I have to ask the real question. Is this worth risking the only shot at salvation that 8 billion lives on Earth have? Less of a resounding yes, but ultimately I decide these guys may have useful information about Tau Ceti. I open the hatch and gaze into the vast emptiness before me. My maneuvering in space feels more natural than I would have expected. I'm carrying 2 tethers, so one is always attached as I slide along my hull. It takes me about 5 minutes to spot the flying cylinder with my naked eye. The computer monitors had been a lot better at detecting it than I was, but it was moving so very slowly that I still had plenty of time to position myself as it approached. It's about the size of a coffee can, dull gray in color with splotches of darker gray. As it glides into my grasp, I'm surprised by how light it feels. Sure, I'm in 0G, but mass in motion can still be felt, and this felt like almost nothing. It must be hollow. Looking back, I recognize that I was so eager to get back in my ship that I probably moved too quickly to be considered safe. I risked my life just to find out what was inside this space jar, but hey, I made it. As soon as I open my EVA suit, I start to gasp. It smells horrible. Not like rank or rotten, but just a real difficult smell for my senses. Is that ammonia? One more whiff. Yeah, that's definitely ammonia. Once out of the suit, I go to grab the floating cylinder, but without my suit, I realize just how hot the thing is. It burns me when I touch it. How had I not noticed that temperature before? I'll have to check my EVA gloves for burn marks, but then again, it was stupid to reach for an unknown object with bare skin in the first place. But even though I was being stupid, I call this foreign object a naughty little cylinder and tell it needs a timeout. I can feel you judging me for talking to inanimate objects, but I am beyond caring about your judgment. I use the thick material of my jumpsuit sleeve to protect my knuckles as I nudge the canister into the airlock to let it cool down. I watch it through the airlock window as I wonder if it's producing heat itself or if it had come out of the ship even hotter and this was the cooled temperature after traveling in space to me. Ugh. I can still smell ammonia in the air. I'm going to the lab to wait it out for a bit. I need to be ready to run tests on this thing once it's cool enough. I had another flashback while I waited. In this one, I met Dr. Loken for the first time. I don't remember much about her at this point, but as soon as I saw her, my mind tensed up. My relationship with this woman was not the most friendly, but I can tell I have professional respect for her. She's smart enough that she convinced Strat it would be easier and safer to build the ship with a centrifuge capacity than it would be to reinvent brand new tools that work in zero-G and just hope that they function. Strat was obsessed with using tools and products that were tested and proven. That's why she ran her whole project out of Microsoft Excel, I guess. And she had had a team developing lab tools to work in zero-G. But Dr. Loken convinced her there wouldn't be time enough to test them sufficiently before sending them off into space, and we should just design the Hail Mary to have a centrifuge capability. Then all of the best and trusted lab equipment that we already use would become an option used in gravity. Strat looked at me, and I had to agree with Loken. She sat there tapping her stylus on her tablet before shrugging. Okay, we'll do it. But she got the last laugh because Loken said she would go on and form a committee, and Strat just told her no, that she, Dr. Loken, now works here. She's leading the team to design the centrifuge. I wasn't volunteering to design it personally, Loken said, looking to me with exasperation. But Strat was already walking out the door. Over her shoulder, she said, I never said you volunteered. I just shrugged and said, you get used to it. The ship has a centrifuge. I am elated at this memory. I have been very concerned about how I was going to conduct any experiments in zero-G, but this changes everything. Now, he spends a couple pages explaining how he figures out how to enable centrifuge mode on the ship, but I'm actually going to just focus on trying to explain how this works in terms of the ship design. Okay, I'm going to be real. I tried writing a detailed explanation of how the ship functions, but as I tried to read it out, it just didn't make sense to me. So I'm not going to try that hard. If you're watching the video version of this, there's an image on screen right now that is the drawing that Andy Weir created. But basically, imagine the ship portion can detach from the fuel cells, only remaining contact with cables, so that way the ship portion can flip. So the point of it is pointing down towards the engines. I know this doesn't make sense. It's the best I can do. And then the engines can start spinning in a circle, which whips the ship, now pointed upside down, around. But if you think about how force works, as it's whipped around, all of a sudden you're getting pushed towards the outer edge, which then creates the false gravity. I know that doesn't make sense. Just trust me that it kind of makes logical sense if you understand science. Google Project Hail Mary ship diagram if you want to understand what I'm talking about. If none of that made sense, just trust me. It's a special maneuver that allows the ship portion to experience gravity so Ryland can do science things. So just assume that he gets the centrifuge humming, gravity comes back to his ship, and he collects the foreign cylinder to run tests. I glance out at the blip A and see that it's now spinning just like I am. Man, these guys want to show how much they get me. Little did they know this was not an attempt at communication. I'm staring at the cylinder that is now sitting on a table in my newly gravity-feeling lab. I first check it with a Geiger counter. Okay, not radioactive. I poke at it with various things to test its hardness. I try to chisel off a shaving of whatever it is, but it almost breaks my chisel. I use my UPC scanner gun to get a readout of what this is made of, but no, that can't be right. The UPC gun must be malfunctioning. It's claiming this is made of xenon. You know, the noble gas. It doesn't react with anything that we know of. On Earth, we've never been able to turn it into a solid state. It takes me a while before I can accept my readout is accurate, but even so, I still have no idea how this is possible. But being flummoxed has one good side effect. It makes me stop my frenzied attack on the cylinder and just look at it. And for the first time, I see that there is a thin line running around the circumference about an inch from the top. I feel it with my fingernail. It's definitely an indentation of some kind. Is it a lid? Maybe it just opens. I initially try to twist it, but it doesn't budge. And then I think, if I'm already accepting xenon can be a solid, why not accept the possibility of aliens not adhering to lefty-loosey, righty-tighty? So I try rotating the two halves the other direction, and it pops open. What I pull from the container confuses me even more, if that's possible. There are two different parts. The first one has two spheres. One is about a marble size, the other maybe a BB size. They're connected by an arched line that widens as it approaches the BB-sized ball until it's as wide as the sphere where it makes Oh, I think I know this one. It's a Petrova line. That shape has been the most consistent thing on my mind for years. This is excellent. So whatever they're doing here has to do with astrophage as well. But then I turn my attention to the other half. It looks like a model of some sort. It has a base with thin, wiry whiskers coming up at different angles and lengths. Each of them has little knobs at the end of the whisker. There are dozens of these. I just stare at it. Dozens of nonsensical possibilities running through my head. And nothing clicks until I see that there is, in the center, an even more miniature version of the Petrova line with its arch connecting two dots. Oh! I pull up a model of Tau Ceti and our surrounding solar systems on my computer, and pretty quickly I solve it. This is a model of stars. Each ball at the end of a whisker represents a different star. From here, I notice there is a filament connecting Tau Ceti to a different sphere. It's not a Petrova line, it's just a straight line, so I know to connect the two dots for some reason. It's pretty far away, about as far as the dot for Sol is from the Tau Ceti dot. I check my star model to identify which star this is. It's 40 Eridani. This must be their home, I think. Wow, I have successfully communicated with an alien species. I'm freaking out right now. But for the first time since I've woken up on the ship, it's in a good way. This makes sense. I knew that astrophage had been affecting all stars in the area except Tau Ceti. These guys must have pieced together the same thing, and now we're here trying to solve the same problem. How rad is that? So what else was there for me to do but solder a filament from Tau Ceti to Sol so they know where I come from? I make quick work of the job. I try to replicate a Petrova line model on Sol as well so they know I'm here for the same reason. And once I've done my best, which, by the way, is not very good compared to the fine craftsmanship of their xenonite model, because yes, I've accepted this is made of xenonite, so I had to come up with a name for a xenon-based solid. Annoyingly, I needed to bring the ship out of centrifuge to send the model back. But what else am I going to do with my time? Once the ship was stationary again and my big buddy Blip A had also readjusted to sit alongside me, I hopped in my EVA and chucked the now reassembled cylinder in their direction. I threw it a bit faster so they would know that I can handle something more than a snail's pace, and I go back inside. It feels like an eternity, but I guess these guys have waited a couple hours for my reply. I could do the same, right? I'm watching the monitor from the cockpit, and I'm starting to get a little bored until the motion alarm goes off once more. Blip C is now headed towards me. This time it's moving faster. It's matching my pace, but what's even cooler is it's on course straight for my airlock. They must have seen where I came out of the first time. God, these guys are smart. It only takes about a minute for the cylinder to reach me. I still hop in my EVA suit, but this time I just sat with the exterior door open and let the cylinder come inside. I get back out of the EVA suit, and this time I'm not waiting for it to cool down, so I grab the heaviest gloves I can find in the lab and twist it open. It looks the same as before. I unscrew it the same lefty way, but this time there's no star map. Instead, it's a model. I have to look at it. What exactly is this? There's a single post from the base holding up an irregular shape. No, there's two irregular shapes actually, connected by a tube. Oh, wait, one of those shapes is the Hail Mary. And the other one is the Blip A. The models have no detail or texture, but it's good enough for me to recognize what they represent. So they did their job. The Hail Mary is only 3 inches long, while the Blip A is closer to 8 inches. Man, that ship is huge. And that tube connecting them. It connects to the Hail Mary airlock and leads to the center of the Blip A's diamond-shaped segment. The tunnel is just wide enough to cover my airlock door. And that's what it hits me. They want to meet. I decide the best thing I can do is send over a sample of my hull so they know what kind of material they're working with, building a tunnel, and once I send the cylinder back their way, I mentally prepare myself for what is about to happen. The truth is, I don't think I can prepare myself in any real way. All I know is I'm about to have first contact with aliens. I already had that privilege of first contact with alien life forms when I discovered astrophage, but these guys seem intelligent. So I'm the 2 times Earth champion of meeting alien life. And as I sit in the ship just waiting, I think about how human beings have a remarkable ability to accept the abnormal and make it normal. For a while, nothing happens, so I go get some snacks, and I'm initially excited when day 10 meal 1 is a burrito. The excitement fades quickly, though, and I realize it is room temperature, but whoa, here comes another flashback. Seriously, a burrito triggered that? But in this one, I am eating a burrito when Strat comes in with my Russian friend Dmitry with some news I didn't want to hear. She orders me to give 25% of my farmed astrophage, which is 2 grams worth at this point, to Dmitry. I like the guy, but this stuff is hard to come by. But Dmitry's team needed it for the tests they were running on making an engine that uses astrophage. They're calling it a spin drive, and it's not one giant propulsion unit. It's actually just over 1,000 individual ones. That way, if one engine fails, I'm not necessarily dead in the water or in space. He shows me in a demonstration how a tiny amount of astrophage for less than a second produces enough heat to melt a block of steel, and how they're designing the ship to make sure this power will not result in self-destruction. And I guess I can be glad of that. But I take a bite out of my burrito back on the Hail Mary, and I look at the monitor. The blip A is now approaching, but not like the ship is approaching. It's a tube. Based on the coloration and visible texture, I'm going to guess this is made of xenonite as well. It's extending from the blip A towards me, headed right for my airlock door. The tube has slowed considerably by the time it makes contact with the Hail Mary, but that doesn't keep my ship from groaning under the pressure of this new contact. I close my ears as a series of scraping noises is followed by silence. The tube was now glued onto my hull, apparently. Oh boy, this is getting real. I'm in my EVA suit before I enter the airlock. It was weird to look out of the exterior port and see something darker than space. At least the stars in the distance provide little specks of light, but nope, this was pitch black. So I turn on my helmet light and am surprised to see the tunnel is blocked off only about 10 feet from my door. Did they create their own airlock inside this tunnel? Man, these dudes are smart. They had created a small pocket so that I could test my own atmosphere in it, potentially allowing us to exist without EVA gear, with a divider allowing us to have our different environments. It's simple enough for me to let oxygen into my portion. I found an emergency release valve in my airlock that will allow me to override and just flood it with oxygen, meaning it will even spill out into the tunnel. So I just have to wait a few minutes until the readings show that I have equal amounts of breathable air on the ship as well as in my portion of the tunnel. But even so, I'm terrified as I go to remove my helmet and open my EVA. Yet another time that this could all be over if something small goes wrong. But I pop the seals on my suit and hold my breath. Nothing happens. I start to breathe in, and sure enough, I've got oxygen. There's a distinct smell of ammonia, but what do you expect from a tunnel made of materials whose ship has an ammonia atmosphere? It's also really warm in here, like I'm sweating just standing here warm. I don't know, maybe I'm just that nervous, but when I get a second, I'm going to open the inner airlock on the Hail Mary so my climate control system can try to lower the temperature for me. Now I start to look at the wall itself. It's made of hexagonal tiles, all of the same drab grayish brown that I've been seeing everywhere so far. I'm busy analyzing the seams between the tiles when I hear a knock. So I knock back. What else am I supposed to do in this situation? But pretty quickly we're at an impasse. It's almost completely dark in here, just a tiny little helmet lamp. I instinctively hold up a finger, telling them to hold on, as if they could see me through this wall. I haven't noticed any cameras or devices, but I rush back inside, leaving the interior airlock open. It feels like I'm breaking a massive rule, but the oxygen levels are the same on both sides. I pack a bag with some essentials, and I come back out and proceed to tape LED lamps in different places so the tunnel is now somewhat illuminated. I scan the hexagons for composition. Yep, they're xenonite, but slightly different shades of xenonite. Maybe it's like steel where you can have different compositions of it. I was quick to notice that each one seemed different from the others, almost like they were running an experiment to see what my atmosphere does in contact with their surfaces. Maybe they now have what they need, but I need to leave so they can readjust their configuration. I start to head back to my airlock, but just as I turn around, movement catches my eye. It's only when I whip back that I, for the first time, realize one of the hexagons is transparent. It's not as clear as a pane of glass, but I can definitely see through it. Wow, how had I missed this? I stare through the panel, but my lights can't illuminate more than a few inches beyond the wall, and I don't see anything. I'm pressing the visor of my EVA up against it when I jump as a rock hits the panel that I'm looking through. But then it just stays there. It's almost triangular in shape with rough edges, almost like an old spearhead. Have I made contact with space cavemen? I thought before chastising myself for being so stupid. But the rock is just floating there. And as I watch, two more spearhead-looking rocks enter. They seem to be moving in sync with each other. As they move a little more into frame, I see that they are attached to a bigger rock that, oh, I see what this is. These aren't rocks. This is a claw. This is an alien's arm that I'm staring at. I press my face up against the clear panel as much as I possibly can until it hurts, but I still can't see much more than the claw, so I study it. Imagine basically like an arcade game claw where the 3 points have a knuckle allowing them to enclose around objects, but instead of the skinny, weak pincers of the notoriously hard arcade game, they are stone-like and thick enough that when they close, there's no space between them. Basically a fist when you think about it. As I'm lost staring at the hand, it taps the wall again. Oh, right, this thing is attached to an alien who is probably getting impatient with me just sitting here doing nothing. I tap back to let them know I'm listening, and then the claw retreats, but it comes back into view holding something. It's a crude xenonite figure, and as I stare at the shape, it looks almost like a doll, except it has an oversized head and thick limbs. Oh, it's me! This is me in my EVA suit with my fishbowl helmet. Oh, this is so cool. Then another hand, or claw, or whatever, comes into frame, and it's holding another figure that I relatively quickly put together is the Hail Mary. I'm watching a puppet show, apparently, but then the hand holding me starts sliding over to the hand holding the Hail Mary. It takes a few repetitions before I realize the thing is telling me to go inside my ship. So I instinctively give it a thumbs up and then smile as I see one of the hands mimic me, although with its big stony fingers it almost looks more like finger guns than a thumbs up. I close the airlocks behind me and start to breathe heavy from all the excitement. I just made contact with an alien life form, a rocky alien life form. Oh, you know what? That's it. Until he tells me otherwise, his name is Rocky. I watch on my monitors as the wall was removed and little robots came from Rocky's ship to start working on whatever it was he wanted to do, but all I can do is guess. And it takes long enough that I start to get a little distracted, but just as I was about to head off to find a snack, I hear knock, knock, knock again. It is going to take a while to get used to being in space and hearing someone knock on your door. I grab another lamp and let my airlock pressurize my end of the tunnel once more. I venture out, and what I see leaves me speechless. The wall had been replaced with only that clear material so I can see through it. And on the other side is Rocky. He's a spider. A massive, stony spider. My fight or flight about kicks in and sends me screaming into my ship when I remind myself that he's friendly. Besides, I am bigger than he is. He's about the size of a Labrador. He's got a rocky carapace like a pentagonal crab with 5 legs coming out of him. Or are they arms? Each one ends in those 3-fingered claws, so I don't know what to decide there. I can't see a face anywhere. I can't really tell what is the front and what is his back, except for the fact that he is facing me. When I step out again, he waves with one of his arms, like I had done when I first came out. I wonder if I'd flipped him off the first time I saw him, if he would have imprinted that as a human greeting, which would have been hilarious. But he taps the glass or glass-like wall and points for me to turn around. He's left me a present. All right, I say, let's see what you left me. So I turn around when... Look, I know I'm in 0G, but I swear my jaw still dropped. He just spoke, but it was like music. No words or inflection, just notes. Kind of like a whale. I marvel at the fact that we are from different solar systems and yet our audible ranges are similar enough to hear each other. And then I turn to him excited. You have language, but how? You don't have a mouth. He points again for me to turn around. He's getting pretty animated. Okay, yeah, I guess solving the language barrier can wait for a second. So I float over to the objects that he's left me. It's a pair of spheres. Each one has an embossed image. One is the Hail Mary and the other has the blip A. It's only at this point that I realize the tunnel isn't warm anymore. He's really made this suitable for humans. The spheres also open up just like his cylinder had. The Hail Mary sphere had what, for lack of a better term, I describe as a complex necklace with all sorts of little balls connected by strings. I hold it up, and it almost looks familiar, but I can't quite place it. I briefly think to myself what I would tell my students if I could see them now. Wait a second. My students. Science class. That's why this looks so familiar. This is a chemical chain of molecules. I counted out. There's 8 circles on one side, 8 on the other. Oh, those are protons. The circles of beads are atoms, and the little connecting dots are chemical bonds. Well, 8 protons is oxygen, and there's 2 of them, so O2. Oh my gosh, he's confirming my atmosphere. I knew I liked Rocky. He chirps a tune in response to my excitement. I look at the collection of beaded chains from the blip A sphere and count them up, and sure enough, 7 protons connected to 3 atoms with a single proton each, nitrogen connected to 3 hydrogens. It's ammonia, just as I'd suspected. But there had been a cluster of little necklaces in his ball, so I counted those up. There's 29 of them. There was only 1 oxygen in mine. I think for a second and realize he's trying to tell me he has 29 times the atmosphere compared to me. Sheesh, Iridians, which that's what I'm calling his species unless I hear otherwise, Iridians live under immense pressure. We're talking like bottom of the ocean levels of pressure. This also tells me that xenonite is tough stuff, considering he has more than 28 times more atmosphere pressing on his side than mine. Wow, I think I would die in seconds if I were on his side, and I'm guessing he wouldn't last long in my fractional pressured atmosphere full of oxygen either. So, I'm so excited by all of this, but I'm also getting very tired. I haven't slept in 2 days. I need to sleep. But I think for a second, and again, hold up my finger as if to say, one moment. Rocky mimicked with one of his fingers, and I ran back into my ship, reached the lab until I found the 1 analog clock on the ship. I bring it back out to Rocky, and he perks up seeing me again. I show him the clock, and I spin the dial around so he can see the movement. He moves his hand in a clockwise motion, so I feel confident enough to proceed. I take a marker and draw a line from 12 to the 2. I really could use more than 2 hours of sleep, but I don't want to keep him waiting too long. You know how when you can't speak the same language as someone, you just talk louder and more articulate as if that's going to help? Well, that's what happened when I said, I'll come back when the clock matches this. He sings some melody in return, but then he starts to tap on the wall. He's gesturing with 2 of his arms as if he's pulling something towards himself, but he doesn't have anything in his hand. Oh, he wants me to put the clock closer. So I move it closer to the wall. He gets more excited, but keeps gesturing for me to bring it closer until I end up just pressing it up against the wall. He raises his hands and shakes them. Alien jazz hands. I assume this is a good thing. Okay, hopefully he got my message. So I turn to head back around, but I hear another tap, tap, tap. I turn and he is pointing at the clock, which has started to float away. So I grab my tape and fasten it backwards to me so that the face of the clock is fixed directly in front of him. He gives me jazz hands again, and I'm pretty confident that is a sign of approval or at least pleasure. I turn to leave again. Tap, tap, tap. I start to grumble like, I need a nap, dude, come on. But he holds up a finger and scuttles off into his ship. I try to see inside the ship when his door opens, but it's pretty small and too far away, plus there's no light coming out of it. While he's gone, I puzzle about his vision. He definitely can track my movements, but I don't see any eyes anywhere. Maybe his vision is in a different part of the spectrum than ours, or I don't know. But when he comes back, he's got a device in his hands. It's another cylinder, which these guys apparently like a lot. About 1 foot long, half as wide. There are 5 windows running along the length of the cylinder. Each has a symbol on it. As I watch, the symbol on the right rotates. The others stay the same, and after the first rotated a number of times, the second rotated, almost like a second and a minute hand. This is an Iridian clock. I say as much, and we exchange jazz hands. And from my brief observations, the Iridians have 3 fingers on each hand and only seem to use 2 of their 5 limbs as arms, which would give them a base of 6 fingers. The same way most of our counting systems use a base of 10 because we have 10 fingers. And I can't go to sleep now. I rush back to grab my stopwatch so I can measure how his seconds compare to mine. He gave me a couple curious whistles while I sat there holding my stopwatch, but I would just hold my finger up and he would give me some more patience. Once I'm convinced I have the sample I need, I run the math and come up with 1 Iridian second being equal to 2.366 Earth seconds. This may feel trivial, but it's actually huge. Rocky and I are astronauts, so if we're going to learn to communicate, science is our best language to learn from each other. But, okay, now the adrenaline has worn off and I really need to take my nap. So I reset the clock to 12, draw a circle around the 2, and tape it back on the wall for Rocky. I shuffle into the ship and I lie in my bed for a while, too excited to sleep. And then just when I think I might be too worked out to actually get some rest, I pass out. The timer goes off and I feel worse. Oh, so much worse than when I first went to bed, but I can't start my relationship with Rocky by breaking a promise, so I drag myself out of bed. When I get back to the tunnel, I see Rocky has been busy building more. He's created a mini airlock complete with controls on my side of the wall so we can pass each other things. Man, this guy is a genius. I give him a very enthusiastic jazz hands and he gives them right back to me. I think that since we've established units of time, maybe units of measurement are next. So I grab a tape measure from the lab and bring it out. I pull the tape from the casing a few times so he gets an idea of how it works, letting it snap back into place. And then I put it in the airlock. As soon as he opened it on his side, the little rubber bits on the casing just melt and peel off, floating away like bubbles. Rocky pokes one of them, but then he returns his attention to the tape measure. So far, the aluminum was holding up, but that was a reminder to me that I will have to be careful about anything else I send over to him, remembering that there's more than 28 times the pressure that I have, as well as it being bloody hot over there. Next, there is a comical or frustrating, if you were in my shoes, exchange where I try to get Rocky to look at the measuring line so I can point out 1 centimeter to him, but he is completely fascinated by pulling the tape out and letting it snap back. It startles him at first, but once he gets used to it, he is having the time of his life, pulling it further and further and watching it snap back into place. A series of cheerful tunes come out of him, and I'm getting stern with him like when my students are acting up, but he's not really paying attention. He finally sees that I want him to look at the tape itself, and he holds it in front of him, but doesn't react, like he doesn't get it. "Are you blind?" I say out of frustration. And then I think, oh geez, he is blind, isn't he? But it started to make sense. No visible eyes on his entire body. I have yet to see a single light source from his ship or in the tunnel other than his astrophage engines. But how has he been mimicking my gestures so much? And he knew where to point, and he would seem to be looking at me as much as someone with no face can be looking at you. And then I think back to the clock. The clock had raised numbers, not just printed ones like the tape measure. And that's why he wanted the clock to actually touch the wall. He used sound, like echolocation. But as I think about it, Iridians take it one step further. They have passive sonar. Bats and dolphins make sound themselves and then judge their spatial awareness based on how the sound bounces off of objects. But Rocky can just hear the ambient sound waves to paint a picture of what is around him. His own clock had very thick numbers that would be easy to pick up from such a sense. I hold up a finger and fly back into the ship where I grab a flat sheet of aluminum. It's 1/16 of an inch thick. When I get back, Rocky has gotten completely tangled up in the tape measure. So I get his attention and hold up one finger. He holds up one finger. Then I hold up 2 fingers. He holds up 2 fingers. Now I hold the aluminum sheet so my hand is blocked from his point of view, and I repeat the exercise, but now holding up 3 and then 5 fingers, and he continues to match me perfectly, even using 2 hands to hold up 5 fingers when I did. The solid aluminum did nothing to stop his vision because he uses sound waves. It's right about now I'm so grateful that I have literally every piece of software and book known to mankind available to me. Strat could be difficult to work with, but she sure knew how to prepare a mission for success. I grab one of the laptops and install a sound wave analysis program on it. It's time I start to learn Rocky's language. Rocky's gone when I get back, and I start thinking about how do I know this is the same Iridian that I'm dealing with? What if it's a different one each time? But I think about how I could pinpoint a few irregular markings on Rocky's carapace that I don't think would be uniform. So I'm pretty sure I will be able to recognize if I'm talking to the same creature. But when I call out, he doesn't come. So after sitting alone for a while, I think to myself that maybe I should go get a proper night's sleep and come back to this fresh. I try to do him a solid and grab a bunch of popsicle sticks from the lab and start taping them together so that they will read out as the time that I will return in Rocky's base 6 system. It's not great, but I'm pretty sure it will be enough for him to pick up on it. I'm going to get a proper 8 hours this time, and then we'll start breaking down language barriers. What can I say about the next few days? I made a lot of progress in communicating with Rocky and learned a fair amount about him. We started with numbers, since we'd already established our clocks. I would point to the 1 on my clock, and then the 1 on his clock, and I would say 1 a couple of times while pointing to them. And then I recorded his response. The software I installed on my laptop took the sounds and identified the notes, and once it gave me an output, I logged it into an Excel sheet. Then I moved on to 2 and 3, etc., etc. Yes and no were the next words I logged, and we started moving on to other science terms from there. Slowly, and with many errors, we built out our shared vocabulary. The easiest way to explain the Iridian language is that the way that English has words with different amounts of letters and sentences with the different amounts of words, Iridian has words that may be a single note or a chord, and a sentence is like a bar or multiple bars of a melody. So as I built out the Excel sheet with vocabulary, I was able to write a script. Now, I'm not much of a computer programmer, but I can create a simple script easy enough. So I built a program that used the Soundwave software, and when Rocky spoke, it would compare any notes or chords he said to the database of known words, and it would display any known words on my screen, essentially translating. Rocky, on the other hand, had no tools, no way of logging what I said, but his comprehension seemed to match my own. He was slowly learning how to understand English. My best guess is that Iridians have a photographic memory of some sort. Once we had established what felt like a minimum viable vocabulary, I decided it was time to try and connect on the reason why we were both here. I grabbed a vial of astrophage from my lab and brought it out to Rocky. I held it up and said, "Astrophage." Rocky's posture changed as soon as he saw it. He shrunk down like he didn't want to be in the presence of that vial and said, well, that was a new word. His voice was quieter. Oh yeah, when it comes to inflection in Iridian, the two things I've noticed are volume as well as octave. So when Rocky was excited, he sang in a high octave, but when he was sad or had other negative emotions, he dropped to a lower octave. After logging astrophage in the Excel, I pointed to the vial again and said, "Astrophage on my star, bad." Rocky responded, which the computer then translated as, "Astrophage on me star, bad, bad, bad." Yes, that's another thing. Instead of having separate words to emphasize the severity of something, he just repeats the word. So instead of very bad or worst, bad, bad, bad is what we get. As we talked more and more, I slowly started to understand common words without the translator. I've never been musically gifted, but if you hear the same chord 100 times in a day, you start to pick up on things. And after a very long day of exciting work, I tell him I need to sleep. I try to teach him the word for sleep by describing that humans go unconscious for about 29,000 seconds. I don't have a word for unconscious yet, but I just mimic sleep by laying on my side with my eyes closed and tell him we do this for the equivalent of hours and hours. At first he doesn't get it, but luckily he perks up and says Iridians do the same, and he curls up like a dead bug and remains motionless as he gives me a new word that I log as sleep. But that got me thinking, how do you explain sleep to someone who had never heard of it? You just say, hey, I'm going to go full unconscious and hallucinate for a while. By the way, I spend a third of my time doing this. And if I can't do it for a while, I go insane and eventually die? Well, at least I didn't have to do that with Rocky. We do have a hang-up, though, when I tell him that I'll be back, but he insists that I sleep here so he can watch, which I think is weird. but he insists on it so much that I decided it will be easier to comply, so I bring my mattress and sheets into the tunnel and duct tape my bed to the ground. The next few days are very intensive and repetitive. We establish our own measurements for other universal things like weight. He gave me a ball through the airlock saying it was 26, and I unfortunately was too thick to realize he meant the ball was made of element 26, iron, and assumed he meant the ball was 26 units of whatever they measured weight in. Let's just say I oftentimes feel like the dumbest creature currently floating around the Tau Ceti system. But it's soon after this that Rocky tells me it's his time to sleep, and he insists that I watch. He couldn't explain to me why it was necessary. He just invoked our unspoken rule that sometimes we just say we do things because that's what humans do or that's what Iridians do, and the other just accepts it. So I asked him why he didn't get another Iridian to do it for him, and his tone drops and slows significantly before he tells me that he's the only Iridian here. That's not possible, I say. As I look at the screen, he just told me that there were 23 members of his crew, but he's the only one that's still alive. Did they die? I ask. Yes. I'm at a loss. Eventually, I just say, bad. Bad, 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 he replies. I tell him I am also the only survivor of my crew and then offer to watch him sleep. Good, he says before settling in, curling up into himself, while the 0Gs levitates his body around the tunnel. While he slept, I had another flashback. This one was the craziest one yet. Not crazier than discovering life, I guess, but, well, crazy by Earth standards anyway. Strat and I were in a New Zealand maximum security prison. Why was I at a maximum security prison while trying to save the world from a dying sun, you ask? Great question. We were there to see a man who was in prison for the deaths of 7 people, which feels like the wrong kind of person to be associating with, but this guy took big swings, and much like Strat coming to the scientist who told the entire academic community they were wrong for claiming life needed water, Strat needed big swings. This man had been charged with the deaths of 7 workers in an accident in a major solar facility that he had been in charge of. There was negligence on his part, largely because at the time of the accident, he had been in Monaco, spending money he had embezzled on a lavish vacation. So yeah, great guy. But still, he had an idea that we needed to explore because the astrophage production was continuing, but it wasn't enough. We needed to ramp up the scale in a massive way. Tell me about your black panel power idea, Dr. Adele, Strat asked. Dr. Adele, a balding man of about 50, was handcuffed to the table, but he didn't look like a physical threat to me. He seemed uninterested in complying until Strat told him his compliance could reduce his life sentence. So he opened up about his black panel idea. He lays out a plan that using very common materials from Earth, which will become important in a second, you build panels using anodized metal encased in a 1 centimeter frame of glass. That gap is important because it will hold on to heat much better than an exposed panel, meaning the panels will heat up to at least boiling point and maintain that temperature. It's hot enough to enrich astrophage without needing additional resources to simulate the heat of the sun. Here's the crazy part. Even a plan like this would require massive, massive scale. How massive, you ask? Well, how about covering 2 trillion square meters of the Sahara Desert in these panels? Like I said, big swings. The thing is, let's not forget Strat has been granted authority by basically all world leaders to make it happen. That means not only getting Africa to agree to a large chunk of their land being covered in these panels, but it means getting the most industrious nations like China and the US to shift large amounts of their manufacturing into creating these panels. It was technically a less efficient breeding system than I had created, but due to the ability to exponentially scale it, it did seem like the best option we had. The next morning, I woke up in the tunnel to Rocky working on his side. He's basically built a workshop out there, so he's always tinkering on something. I tell him I need to shower and eat, and he waves at me dismissively to go eat while he keeps working. When I'm back, feeling fresh, I decide after a week of building our language abilities, it's time to turn attention to why I was really here. Rocky, I'm here because astrophage makes Sol sick and doesn't make Tau Ceti sick. If I don't figure out why, life on Earth will die. Are you here for the same reason? He put his tools down as he told me that this was the exact same reason. If they don't figure out how to get astrophage out of Eridani, his species will die. While on the topic of death, he asked me why my crewmates died, and I tried to explain the high-risk comas we were in, but I don't think I did a very good job. I then asked how his crew died. He says he didn't know. He said they all just got sick, but some sickness they didn't know what it was. I asked him what he knew about it, and we do some word ping pong until he basically describes that their cells were having issues, not infections, but something about their cells was killing them off. And I start to wonder if Iridians know about radiation. They've traveled through space, so I would have to assume they would for sure, but it doesn't sound like they do know. I need a word, I say. Fast-moving hydrogen atoms. Very, very fast. Hot gas was his reply. No, faster than that. Very, very, very fast. He wiggles his carapace. He's confused, so I try another approach. Space has very, very, very fast hydrogen atoms. They move almost at the speed of light. They were created by stars long, long ago. No, Rocky said. No mass in space. Space is empty. Oh boy. No, that's wrong. There are hydrogen atoms in space. Very, very fast hydrogen atoms. Understand. You weren't aware of that, I ask? No. I stare in shock. How can a civilization develop space travel without ever discovering radiation? So I spent another few hours creating a bunch more vocabulary words with Rocky so I can explain radiation and how his crewmates died. He thanks me once he understands, but he still has one question. Why didn't I die? Question. That didn't take me too long to figure out. You see, you know what is the complete shield against radiation? Astrophage. We learned that pretty quickly on Earth, so part of the ship's design was to create an insulating layer of astrophage all around the ship that basically radiation proofs the Hail Mary. And from my time with Rocky, I had learned that as smart as he is, he wasn't on board as a scientist. He was an engineer, which explains why he's so good at making and fixing things. And when I asked him where he spent most of his time, it turns out the engineering bay was at the back of the ship, surrounded by their fuel tanks of astrophage. So him being isolated from his crew ended up being his salvation. He sinks lower and hums softer at this realization, and I pieced together that Iridians had never learned about radiation because their atmosphere is so dense they don't experience any radiation naturally. Because our atmosphere is so thin, we deal with radiation on Earth's surface, so we'd had to figure this out long before we'd been in space. But until the astrophage problem, Iridians didn't even consider space. Think about it. They don't have eyes, so they don't see the stars. The atmosphere is so dense that even humans would only see complete darkness on their planet's surface. This had been their first space mission. They had never had reason to understand radiation until now. But after all this talk, I had a question for him to consider. Ask, he said, why is Iridian science and human science so similar? Billions of years, but almost the same progress. His answer was amazingly simple, and I felt even dumber. Science has to be similar, or you and I would not meet, Rocky says. If planet has less science, it no can make spaceship. If planet has more science, it can understand and destroy astrophage without leaving their system. Iridian and human science both in special range, can make ship, but can't solve astrophage problem from home. It made total sense. A less advanced species wouldn't be capable of space travel. A more advanced one would probably figure it out without having to travel 12 light years away. Anyone who ended up here with us would be in the same range of technological advancement. Good observation, I tell Rocky. While we talk about biology, I learn a lot more about the Iridian biology, and it's fascinating. I really wish I could just spend my life learning about this instead of having to play savior to mankind by figuring out how to stop astrophage. Erid is so close to its star, the sheer amount of energy entering the biosphere is ridiculous. And Iridians, being at the top of the food chain, have a heck of a lot more energy to work with than human bodies do. I'm not even going to try to explain how it works, but Iridians are, in effect, biological smelters. Humans have hair, fingernails, tooth enamel, and other dead stuff on our bodies that serve critical purposes, but Iridians take the concept to the ultimate extreme. Rocky's carapace is made of oxidized minerals. His bones are honeycombed metallic alloys. His blood is mostly liquid mercury. Even his nerves are inorganic silicates, transmitting light-based impulses. All told, Rocky only has a few kilograms of biological material. Single-celled organisms travel through the bloodstream, building up or repairing the body as needed. Basically, an Iridian is what you would get if bees evolved to make hives that could walk, and the queen was as intelligent as a human. A couple other crazy random facts is their blood can reach up to 305 degrees Celsius, and they essentially use combustion to move their muscles. It's like they're steam powered, which is crazy because the way our body needs sleep just to recharge, theirs needs sleep to cool down. It's more like complete paralysis. They don't rest until their systems become so overheated that they have to let them cool down, which is why their sleep can range from 3 to over 12 hours instead of our more predictable range of 8 hours a night. And when they enter cooling mode, they lose control of their muscles. Their cognitive functions turn off during this period, meaning they literally can't wake up, which finally explained to me the whole I sleep, you watch part of their culture. Humans evolved to sleep while still on enough of alert that a sound would wake us up. But Iridians have no capacity to wake up, so they evolved to watch each other as a pack mentality to protect against threats. How can you hear light? Question. His language patterns mean that instead of just using inflection to indicate a question, he says the word question at the end of the sentence. It's kind of endearing to me. So I try to explain how eyes work. He feels slightly annoyed when he learns that I can also hear sound, but pretty quickly we establish my ears are no match for his auditory receptors. It's his whole body. So the way my two little eyeballs can create a 3D model of the world it sees, his body allows him to essentially do the same thing with sound waves. I tell him how I can't see through walls, and he points to the divider between us as if to say, this is a wall. Yes, I explain, but this is a special wall that lets light pass through. Amaze! I give you many choices for wall when first build. You choose this because light pass through? Question? That's right, buddy. I gave you choices based on sound reaction. Never thought of light. This whole time we've been talking, he's been working on something. But just now, he puts his tools down and says, all done. All done with what? Device keeps me alive in small room. He scuttles off into his ship and returns with more clear panels of xenonite that he shapes into basically a large geodesic ball. He climbs inside of it with the device that he had just made, which was basically a mini climate control. I ask him what this is for. He looks at me with his faceless carapace and says, room and device keep me alive in your ship. Want to see human technology is allowed? Question? I scoff out of surprise. Oh my gosh, yes, you can totally come around and look at whatever you like. Excellent, he says. Now you leave. I make new divider wall with bigger airlock so I can pass through. I grab all my things, including my mattress, and has been tied down for several days, and seal myself up in my ship. I get to work tidying up while he is tearing down the tunnel again. I wasn't exactly expecting company. There were clanking noises from the tunnel for a while, and I could see the robots working again alongside of Rocky. When all was said and done, the new airlock section of the wall was more than large enough for him, but not large enough for me. Guess I won't be visiting the Blip A anytime soon. Rocky emerges inside his little geodesic ball, rolling along happily like he's on the galaxy's clunkiest hamster wheel. He rolls, but since it's actually a sphere comprised of flat surface pieces, it kind of hobbles along. And as he enters the Hail Mary, one of his arms waves at me. Oh, and in case you were wondering how he was moving forward since we're still in 0G, he had two magnets in his front hands that he would use to propel himself along the surface. The magnetics would pull the front of the ball down to the ground, allowing him to propel forward. But it was challenging enough work that once he gets inside of the ship, he stops using the magnets. So, do I carry you around, I ask? Yes, carry, thank. I test the temperature of his ball, but it's cool enough to touch. I know the inside is hot enough for Rocky, and I marvel again at how good of an insulator xenonite is. He is heavy, by the way. Heavy enough that if we weren't in 0G, there's no way I would be able to hoist him around. As it is, I have to exert a lot of force to get him going, and from there I just kind of nudge his ball in the right direction. I mention how heavy he feels, and he says that his mass is equal to 168 kilograms. He weighs more than 300 pounds. Keep in mind, he's the size of a Labrador. Oh, and I guess I haven't mentioned this yet, but Rocky quickly took to converting all numbers of time, weight, and distance into Earth units because he is much faster at doing it than I am. He even called me slow when I was trying to convert into Iridian once. He asked how much I weighed, and I told him about 80 kilograms, which surprised him. But I remind him I am mostly made of water, and he seems somewhat satisfied with that. I nudge him into the lab, and he perks up, a round of jazz hands. Good room. His voice is a full octave higher than normal. Want to understand all. But he actually wanted a full tour of the entire ship before we settled into the lab. So I show him the dormitory and the storage room, but then he is very quick to wanting to get back to the good room. I place him on top of the steel table in the room and tell him to use his magnets. He puts them towards the bottom side of the ball and thoink, he is suddenly secured to the surface of the table, which is bolted to the floor. I proceed to explain all the significant tools and some insignificant ones that still caught his eye. When I tell him about the 3D printer, he becomes very intrigued, but I tell him it won't work in 0G. You ship no can rotate with tunnel attached, he said thoughtfully. That's right. He thinks for a moment. U-ship has more science than my ship. Better science. I bring my things into U-ship, then release tunnel. You make U-ship spin for science. We science how to kill astrophage together. Save Earth, save Arid. This is good plan question? I hadn't expected this tour to turn into having a new roommate, but I couldn't exactly argue with his logic. I just asked about his ship, though. His xenonite crafting has been pretty darn handy already. I'd hate to give that up. I bring materials to make xenonite, can make any shape. From there, he rushed back into his tunnel to collect all of his things and as much xenonite material as we could justify. Which is when I was hit with another flashback. This one was Strat talking to the representatives of that Thai company who had invented the medical coma process that only worked on 1 in every 7,000 people. It still feels like the best bet on our timeline. But the concern is already the limited number of people willing to give up their lives for this mission. How can you expect to find a commander, an engineer, and a scientist with that lucky gene? To set an example, I want everyone on this project, even tangentially related, to get tested. We might not have enough qualified candidates, and we need to be ready to expand the pool. She was looking at me as she said this, and I didn't like how it made me feel. I remember after college, my girlfriend Linda moved in, and at the time I was shocked with how much random junk she had with her and how it took up most of my apartment. Well, Linda is a minimalist compared to Rocky, and even better, since he was in his ball, guess who actually got to load all of his stuff inside the Hail Mary? It was essentially a massive number of duffel bags, more cubed in shape, but soft material like a duffel. He had piles everywhere, but especially the dormitory. He took over the entire room except a tiny space around my personal bunk. Everything became closet space for my little friend. Once everything's inside, he instructs me to rotate the ship from the tunnel and it should break free without issue. I do so cautiously, but he hasn't been wrong about anything engineering related yet. As soon as we're separated from the Blip A, we start talking science. I knew Rocky had been there before me, so I asked if he'd already collected samples of astrophage from Tau Ceti's Petrovo line. He regretted to inform me that the device they had to sample astrophage had broken off of their ship during travel. He spoke in a low mumble as he explained that he had tried again and again to make a replacement. It really felt like he took this failure personally. He had slumped down as he talked like he was ashamed. Fail, fail, fail. I am Repair Iridian. I am not Science Iridian. Smart Science Iridians died. I tell him not to talk like that. You're alive. You're here, and you haven't given up. He doesn't even respond to my encouragement. I try so many times, fail so many times. Not good at science. Hey, perk up, I say. I'm a science human. You are good at making and fixing things. Together, we will figure this out. He sits up a little taller at that. Yes, together. You have device to sample astrophage question? Luckily, my answer was yes. Rocky goes on about how relieved he is because he tried so long to find a replacement. Much time here, much time alone. I ask how long he's been here alone. He thinks. Need new word. This still happens every day, but it's less and less often. When the computer is ready, he spouts off a massive big number, which we identify as an Iridian day, and then learn that he's been here for just shy of 200 Iridian days, which he then converts into Earth units, that equals 46 years. Once we do the calculation, we figure out he has been floating in the Tau Ceti system alone, not knowing if he will ever solve this problem for longer than I've been alive. This prompts the question, how long do Iridians live? He thinks as he converts to Earth terms, average age is 698 years. Holy cow! I learned that he's not quite middle-aged, he's a spry 291, but Rocky is older than the United States. He was born about the same time as George Washington. Rocky tilts his carapace like he does when he's curious. Why you so surprised question? How long do humans live? I'm almost embarrassed to admit. Now that he's moved in, Rocky wants to build himself a habitat with a room of sorts in the dormitory and tunnels that connect to the other compartments of the Hail Mary so he can move around as I work. He tells me it will take several days to build, partially because he'll be instructing me on how to actually build it since he's stuck inside his ball. And I express how I am eager to get moving on solving the astrophage problem. I tell him how I want to work fast. Why so fast? Question. Slower is safer, less mistakes? That leads to a conversation where we discover Earth is in danger much sooner than Arid. Because of how much hotter his planet is, they have at least 70 more years before really bad things start to happen. I tell him how Earth has already started to change and I have a small window to work with. Then we work. Work now. Learn how to kill astrophage. Then you return to Earth. I'm going to have to explain this to him at some point. Might as well be now. I'm not going back. I'm going to die here. He shudders at the statement. Why? Question. I only have enough fuel to get here. I'll put my findings on little probes that will go back home, but I'll stay here. You knew this when you left Earth? Question. Yeah, sure did. You are good human. Thanks, I say, before trying to change the topic back to solving the problem. Wait, Rocky says. How much astrophage you need to return home? Question. I think my cells hold about 2 million kilograms. He thinks for a moment. I can give. I stop dead in my tracks. What? I can give. I have extra. Still have plenty left for my return to Arid. My ship much more efficient on trip than planned. Have more than 2 million kilograms extra. I fall into the nearest chair as emotion overwhelms me. I'm going to make it home. I collapse into sobs, leaving Rocky to ask if I'm okay. Yes, I'm more than okay. Thank you. I am happy. You no die. Let's save planets. I'm actually going to live. Okay, I'm breaking in here because saving this to the end of the chapter would take away from the impact of what I want to share. Andy Weir, in an interview, said that they made several choices in the making of the movie that made him go, why didn't I think of that? And I'm betting this right here is one of them. Because what I want to point out is that this moment in the movie has the same effect to the plot, but a massive difference to how we perceive the characters and their relationship. And it honestly is the cleanest example of how I'd compare the overall tonal differences of the book and the movie, which I believe are both great, but they shine for different reasons. The book shines because of the optimism and playful friendship that develops between Rocky and Grace, but that's all layered over a very intricate web of applied science, real and fictional. A lot of the clever plot twists come from some scientific revelation or another, including this moment in the book. We later learn the reason Rocky has so much extra fuel is because they didn't know about time dilation and they thought it would take longer to arrive. So him having extra fuel is a very clever choice to make because it runs off the same assumption that the species who had never traveled through space and didn't know about radiation wouldn't know about time dilation with interstellar travel. But if you've seen the movie, you know this scene plays out very differently. Rocky doesn't say, I have extra. He says he will give Grace enough fuel to go home. And when Ryland asks about how or why he can do that, he says that it will take him 6 years longer to get there, but he'll still make it just fine. He's making a sacrifice to save his friend. So the moment lands with way more emotion than it does here in the book. I mean, Grace feels a lot of emotion because he'll be saved in the book as well, but it feels cheaper when Rocky is just like, oh yeah, I have tons of extra fuel because of a scientific technicality. The moment feels much more of a gravitational pull in the movie because Rocky is taking on risk and sacrificing part of himself in order to save his friend. And I'd say in general, that sums up the difference between the book and the movie. The story is very faithfully adapted, but the book is like if you gave the skeletal structure of the plot to a science first, emotion second storyteller, and the movie plays like if you gave the same skeletal plot to the people who were emotions first, science second storytellers, which, in my opinion, are both great experiences if you're open to both. Back to it. I had another flashback recently. This time it was me meeting the 6 candidates for the Hail Mary crew, the primary commander, engineer, and scientist, and each of their backups. Yao and Ilyukina were the primary crew, but the primary scientist was a man named Dubois. He was African-American and held multiple PhDs. He was Impressive. He also talked like a documentary narrator, but I liked him. I wonder what happened to him that I ended up here. Rocky and I spent the next few days with a mix of building his habitat, which now is like a series of hamster habit trails running through the entire ship so he can follow me around. But we also were planning our move. We had already sent the ship towards the Petrova line to gather a sample. It would take several more days to reach it, so we had time. In Rocky's decades in the system, he had managed to chart as much as he could about the Tau Ceti system, including planets. We identified the planet that had the Petrova line we were headed to. I had labeled it Tau Ceti E. He told me that was a boring name, so I told him he should name it. He told me we were on my ship, so I should name it, but I pushed back, saying that Earth culture states if you discover something, you name it. He thinks for a time before telling me a name in Iridian, so I do still essentially have to create a name in my language. I asked him what that word means. He says it's the name of his mate. My eyes go big. You never mentioned you had a mate. Possible mate has new mate. I gone long time. Well, that's sad to think about. Yes, sad, but necessary. I considered what to name his mate, essentially, but it doesn't take long before the perfect partner for Rocky comes to mind. Tau Ceti E is now called Adrian. When we get close enough to planet Adrian, my tools analyze its atmosphere. It takes a few tries. I've been in space for years with zero maintenance, so I'm just glad it still works after a few attempts. The analysis comes back. 91% carbon dioxide, 7% methane, 1 argon, with some trace gases. Well, I guess that's encouraging. The Petrova line is still headed to a planet with high carbon dioxide like Venus, but we're still a day away from being able to test the actual astrophage content of the Petrova line. I explained to Rocky how my ship will sample the astrophage as we pass through the Petrova line. It's basically like space flypaper, but he doesn't get that reference. He asks how we'll collect the sample from outside. I tell him I'll grab it in my EVA suit. Humans are amazed. You leave ship. But then he thinks for a second and says, amaze is wrong word. Better word is... What does that mean, I ask. When person not act normal, danger to self? Ah, I say. For a second, I consider typing brave into my laptop to match that word, but then realize the better choice would be crazy. As we draw closer and closer to planet Adrian, I become more and more amazed at it. Sure, being in a different star system was cool, but Tau Ceti looked mostly like Sol. But Adrian, well, she looked different from any planet in our system. She was pale green with dark bands swirling around her like Jupiter and Saturn. But Adrian isn't a gas giant. She's a rocky world. Her atmosphere is just so thick, I can't see the surface. I am broken from my awe as my little rocky friend points what looks almost like a gun at me. It works. Success. What is it? I ask. It turns out the clever little devil had made a device that can essentially see light for him. It's basically a camera that converts light into signals he can pick up. He starts waving his camera gun all around the ship as he starts to take in how I must experience things. He asks me what wavelengths humans can see and adjusts his device to only pick up the human range of vision. Now I see what you see. You're an amazing engineer, I tell him. He then tells me humbly that these devices were already in existence for different purposes. He had just adjusted them slightly for his needs. But we quickly learn that trying to explain colors to someone who has never seen before and is only interpreting light frequencies is tricky. For example, he ends up naming green middle rough because that's how it looks to him. After what feels like not very long, we have suddenly passed through the Petrova line. So I get into my EVA suit and head outside. I'm dumbstruck by the beauty of Adrian when I don't have the limited view of a porthole or a monitor. I just float there for several minutes. I can't shake myself out of it until Rocky asks, "What's taking so long?" through my radio. I'm looking at Adrian. It's pretty. Look later. Get sample now. Well, you're pushy. Yes, get sample. So I collect the sample, climb back inside, kill the engines, and fire up the centrifuge again so I can run some tests. Even though I've gotten used to 0 Gs at this point, I'm always grateful when there's a reason to be in centrifuge mode. As a refresher, because the breeding takes place on the carbon dioxide planet, a sampling of the Petrova line on Earth, and I'm assuming Eridani, has twice as much astrophage heading back to the star as it has enriched astrophage heading to the planet. So I was expecting a 2-to-1 ratio. but what I see makes me pause. What is interesting, question? Rocky asks. I scratch my head. Both halves are the same population, I say, while I stare at the wall in thought. Not expected, Rocky says. You got that right, buddy. I run the test a few times. It always comes back the same. Rocky verifies my method to make sure I'm not miscalculating somehow. I put it under the microscope, and I let out a gasp. There's way more than an astrophage on here. It's an entire ecosystem of amoeba-like life forms. There's too many for me to count. Rocky is bouncing off the walls of his tunnel. Amaze, amaze, amaze. I say something about how Adrian is not just a planet with the right carbon dioxide, it is also a planet with life, which explains the methane in the atmosphere. Rocky is going absolutely feral. Life, life, he says. Life is reason for population discrepancy. Life is reason. I haven't quite put together what he means yet. He is tapping his claws on the tunnel as he tells me there's some life on Adrian that is eating astrophage, creating the population balance. Of course, natural order. Holy crap! Astrophage has a predator on Adrian. Astrophage has a predator, I yell out. Rocky and I both start dancing and doing jazz hands. There's a whole biosphere on Adrian. It's not just astrophage. There's even an active biosphere within the Petrova line. This is where it all started. It has to be. How else can we explain countless, extremely different life forms that all evolved to migrate in space? They all came from the same genetic root. Astrophage was just one of many, many life forms that evolved here. And with all life, there is variance and predation. Adrian isn't just some planet that astrophage infected. It is astrophage's homeworld. And it's the home of astrophage's predators. This is amazing, I yell. Rocky is screaming in high octaves. We find predator, take home, eat astrophage, breed, eat more astrophage, breed. We save stars. Yes! I press my knuckles against the tunnel wall. Fist bump. What? Question? I wrap the tunnel again. Do this, I say, pointing to my fist, telling him to emulate my gesture against the wall. Celebration, I say. Celebration, Rocky says back. And that, my listeners, is where we will wrap up this part 1. Now, a reminder, if you want the full episode now, plus other bonuses like extended episodes and access to the next book so you can read along in advance, there's a link to sign up for the protagonist edition of the show in the episode description. Part 2 will be out next week, and I do have a part 1 takeaway to share with you on the way out today. And my biggest takeaway from this part of the story is that not nearly enough of us take advantage of the brilliance of the scientific method in our lives. And if you hear that and say, but Jameson, I'm not a scientist. Oh, brother, let me just remind you, I'm the same guy who took one college-level chemistry class in high school, so I never had to take science in college. But one of the things that stood out to me with Grace, especially in the earliest chapters, is how he defaults into the scientific method to try and piece his world together. And if you're just completely oblivious to the scientific method, here's a list of the steps in plain language. First, you observe something. Then you ask why. Then you make your best guess at why. You test it in a way that it could be proven wrong. You look at what actually happened, and then you update your belief based on the results, repeating if necessary. See, there's nothing inherently chemistry related to that, or biology, or physics. This is simply a proven process to go from an unknown to a known. The only question is how many times you have to run through that loop to figure out the right answer. But when it comes to our lives, we often don't get past the first, maybe third step, because there have been plenty of times I have ventured to guess why I can't seem to break a bad habit, or why I feel such a strong aversion to taking some sort of action that might be useful to me, but I often make my best guess in a way that assumes there's nothing I can do to change it. You know, the whole, that's just how I am kind of answer, which isn't really an answer. So something I've started playing with, and I think you should too, is actually running hypotheses about my own life. And thanks to AI, you can basically have Claude or Gemini or whatever guide you through it. You don't have to be a master of the scientific process. You can just go in and say, hey, I want to use the scientific method to figure out why I am so slow to start being productive in the morning. Walk me through that. It will start asking you questions. You'll pick which hypothesis feels most probable, and you'll come up with an experiment to run so you can get to the bottom of why you're so sluggish. One way of thinking about the scientific method applied to your life is that it's a structured way to not lie to yourself. Because if you are honest in your questions and your answers through the process, you'll pretty quickly get to where you can tell what struggles you face are inherent to your nature versus because of the choices you make. If you're sluggish in the mornings, it may be because of something out of your control, but it is also very likely that it's a combination of eating late, that caffeine you drank at 7 p.m., and your undiagnosed sleep apnea. All things that you could figure out if you simply ran the tests to determine why you're struggling so much. It may be commonly known as the scientific method, but for your sake, just consider it the method of discovery. And you can use it to discover things about yourself and your current situation in life. Think back to this episode. Grace used it all the time, and he'll continue to use it through the rest of the story. It's not a tool of a certain profession. It's a mindset built on curiosity and a desire to get to the answers. Sounds like something all of us could benefit from. Okay, that wraps it up for this episode. Subscribe to the show to make sure you don't miss part 2. Leave 5 stars if you're on a podcasting platform, or like and comment if you're on YouTube. In fact, you know what? For those of you who do listen on podcasting apps, if you're feeling extra generous today, meaning you're willing to give me 30 more seconds of your time, go subscribe to Becoming the Main Character on YouTube. I know these very, very long episodes are not ideal for the platform, but I'm uploading them because I have the video versions already. But the sub count is just depressing to look at compared to the thousands of you guys who listen on Spotify or Apple, etc. So if you're feeling generous, go sub to the YouTube. Maybe the algo will start taking notice and help find the audience there. But okay, that does it for today. Come back next week for part 2 of Andy Weir's sci-fi epic, Project Hail Mary. We'll see you back here real soon.